My name is Nathan, and today I'm going to tell you about the day God spoke words to me that changed everything. Give me what scares you. I have already gone before you. But to understand why those words shattered me, you need to understand the man I was. A man completely controlled by fear. Before we go further, if this story resonates with you or challenges you, please subscribe to this channel, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment about your own journey with fear. Your story matters, and it might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. I was 34 years old, living in Seattle, working as a software engineer at a major tech company. On paper, my life looked successful. Good job, nice apartment, respected by colleagues. But beneath that surface, I was drowning in fear. Not the dramatic kind of fear, no phobias or panic attacks that would make people notice. Just constant, low-grade anxiety that controlled every decision I made. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of making the wrong choice, fear of what people thought, fear of taking risks, fear of being exposed as not good enough. I'd been living this way for so long that I didn't even realize how much fear ran my life. It was just normal. The voice in my head that said, "Don't try that, you'll fail," or "Don't speak up, they'll think you're stupid," or "Don't take that opportunity, it's too risky." I thought that was wisdom, caution, being smart, but it was fear. Pure, paralyzing fear, dressed up as prudence. My relationship suffered because of it. I dated Sarah for 3 years, and she was everything I'd ever wanted. Kind, intelligent, fun, deeply faithful. She'd hinted, more than hinted, that she was ready for marriage, but I couldn't propose. What if I wasn't ready? What if I failed as a husband? What if she eventually realized I wasn't good enough? What if marriage changed everything and I lost what we had? So I waited and analyzed and overthought until finally 6 months ago she'd had enough. "Nathan, I love you, but I can't keep waiting for you to overcome whatever fear is holding you back. I need someone who's willing to move forward, even when it's scary. And you're not that person." She was right, and losing her confirmed my deepest fear, that I wasn't enough, that my caution was justified, that taking risks only led to pain. At work, I watched younger colleagues get promoted past me. Not because they were more talented, I was good at my job, maybe better than most, but because they took risks. They volunteered for challenging projects. They spoke up in meetings with bold ideas. They weren't paralyzed by the fear of being wrong. I stayed safe, took assignments I knew I could handle, never volunteered for anything that might expose my limitations, never shared ideas that might be shot down. I was competent but invisible, reliable but forgettable. My manager had pulled me aside 3 months ago. "Nathan, you're talented, but you're playing it too safe. We need people willing to take risks, to innovate, to push boundaries. If you want to advance here, you're going to have to step out of your comfort zone." But stepping out of my comfort zone was exactly what I couldn't do, because comfort zone meant safety, and safety meant protection from the failure and rejection I so desperately feared. I'd grown up in a home where mistakes were criticized harshly. My father, a successful attorney, had impossibly high standards. Nothing I did was ever quite good enough. An A- was, why not an A? A successful project was, but what about these flaws? Any risk that didn't pan out was, "See, I told you to be careful." So I learned early, the way to avoid criticism was to avoid risk. The way to avoid failure was to only try things you were certain you could succeed at. The way to avoid rejection was to never put yourself out there in the first place. And that strategy had worked, sort of. I'd avoided major failures, but I'd also avoided major successes. I'd avoided rejection, but I'd also avoided deep connection. I'd avoided criticism, but I'd also avoided growth. I was 34 years old, and I'd built a life that was safe but small, protected but empty, careful but meaningless. 3 weeks ago, something shifted. I was at a coffee shop working on my laptop when I overheard a conversation at the next table. 2 men, probably in their 60s, talking about regrets. "The thing I regret most," one said, isn't the risks I took that didn't work out. It's the risks I didn't take because I was afraid, the business I didn't start, the woman I didn't pursue, the opportunities I passed on because they felt too scary, all that caution. What did it get me? A life half lived. His words hit me like a physical blow. Was that going to be me in 30 years, looking back on a life controlled by fear, regretting not the failures, but the things I never even tried? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah, about the promotion I'd never get, about the dreams I'd abandoned because they felt too risky, about how fear had shrunk my life to something manageable, but ultimately unsatisfying. For the first time in years, I prayed. I'd grown up going to church. My mother was faithful, took us every Sunday. But I'd drifted away in college, and faith had become just another area of my life where I played it safe, believing enough to seem respectable, but not enough to actually depend on God for anything real. God, I said into the darkness of my bedroom, I don't even know if you're listening, but I'm tired of being afraid, tired of playing it safe, tired of letting fear control everything. If you're real, if you can help, I need something to change, because I can't keep living like this. Nothing happened. No voice, no feeling, no sign, just the same darkness and the same fear, and the same sense of being trapped in a life I'd built to protect myself. But that was actually just a prison. But the next Sunday, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I went to church. Not my childhood church. I'd moved to Seattle for work, and never found a church here. I just picked one near my apartment and walked in. The sermon that morning was about fear, about how fear keeps us from the life God wants for us, about how God calls us to courage, not because the path is safe, but because He goes before us. The pastor told a story from the Bible, Joshua leading the Israelites into the promised land. God's command, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Notice, the pastor said, God doesn't say don't be afraid because nothing bad will happen. He says don't be afraid because I will be with you. The presence of God is the antidote to fear, not the absence of risk, not the guarantee of success. Just the promise, I go before you, I am with you, you don't face this alone. Something in those words cracked open a door I'd kept locked for years. The idea that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about moving forward despite fear, because God had already gone before me. I left church that morning, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe there was another way to live. Maybe I didn't have to be controlled by fear. Maybe God could actually help me become the person I was, too afraid to be. I had no idea how right I was, or how completely God was about to transform my understanding of fear, faith, and what it means to truly trust. The journey was just beginning, and it would challenge everything I thought I knew about safety, risk, and surrender. That Sunday sermon planted something in me that I couldn't ignore. For the first time in my adult life, I started going to church regularly, not out of obligation or habit, but out of genuine hunger for something different than the fear-driven life I'd been living. The church was called Grace Community, a mid-sized congregation in the university district. The people were welcoming without being pushy. The teaching was solid without being judgmental, and somehow, week after week, the messages seemed to speak directly to my situation. But it was a conversation after church 3 weeks later that really began to shift things. I'd been sitting in the back as usual. My fear even controlled where I sat, keeping me on the edges where I could leave unnoticed. A man about my age sat down next to me during the coffee hour. "I'm James," he said, extending his hand. "I've seen you here the past few weeks. New to Grace?" "Yeah, Nathan. Just started coming about a month ago. What brought you?" I hesitated. My default was always to give the safe answer, the surface response that wouldn't reveal too much. But something made me answer honestly. "I'm tired of being afraid all the time." James nodded slowly. "I know that feeling. Mind if I share something?" Over the next hour, James told me his story. How he'd lived paralyzed by fear for years. How it had cost him his marriage, opportunities, relationships, how he'd finally hit a breaking point and cried out to God, and how slowly God had been teaching him what it meant to trust instead of fear. The turning point, James said, was when I realized fear was actually a form of control. I thought I was just being cautious, but really I was trying to control outcomes, trying to protect myself from pain, trying to manage life so nothing bad could happen. And that's the opposite of faith. His words cut deep. So what changed? I started practicing surrender. Every time I felt fear rise up, I'd literally say out loud, God, I'm afraid of this. I give it to you. I choose to trust that you've gone before me. It felt stupid at first, like words without power. But over time, something shifted. The fear didn't disappear, but its control over me weakened. And it worked? You're not afraid anymore? I'm still afraid sometimes, but I'm not controlled by it anymore. There's a difference. Fear is a feeling, but I don't have to obey it. I can acknowledge it and choose courage anyway, because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's trusting God despite the fear. After James left, I sat in my car for a long time, thinking about his words. Fear as control, trust as the antidote, surrender as practice. That week, I decided to try something small. At work, there was a project no one wanted, a complex system redesign that could either be a huge success or a massive failure. High risk, high visibility, exactly the kind of thing I'd always avoided. The old Nathan would have stayed silent when they asked for volunteers. But sitting in that Monday morning meeting, I felt the familiar fear rising. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? What if everyone sees my limitations? And then I remembered James's words. I whispered under my breath, God, I'm afraid, but I give this to you. I trust you've gone before me. Then I raised my hand. I'll take it. The room went quiet. My manager looked surprised. Nathan, the guy who never volunteered for anything risky, was raising his hand. You sure, Nathan? This one's a challenge, I'm sure. Walking out of that meeting, my hands were shaking. What had I just done? I just volunteered for something I might fail at spectacularly. But underneath the fear, there was something else, something that felt like excitement, possibility, the tiniest hint of freedom. That night, I couldn't sleep, not from anxiety this time, but from adrenaline. I'd done something brave, small maybe, but brave. The next Sunday, I told James about it. He grinned. That's it. That's exactly it. You acknowledged the fear, gave it to God, and chose courage anyway. Now do it again, and again, and again, until courage becomes more natural than fear. But what if I fail? What if this project crashes and burns and everyone sees I wasn't capable? Then you fail, and you learn, and you get back up. Nathan, you've been so afraid of failure that you've been failing by default, failing to try, failing to grow, failing to become who God created you to be. At least if you fail while trying, you're actually in the game. His words were harsh but true. I'd been so focused on avoiding failure that I hadn't realized I was already failing, just in a different way. Over the next month, the project consumed my life. It was harder than I'd expected. There were moments when I was convinced I'd made a terrible mistake, when the old fear screamed that I should have stayed safe, should have let someone else take this risk. But every time the fear rose up, I practiced what James had taught me. God, I'm afraid. I give this to you. I trust you've gone before me. Sometimes I said it 10 times a day, sometimes more, and slowly something began to shift. The fear was still there, but it started to lose its power. I began to notice that most of what I feared never actually happened. The catastrophic failure I imagined didn't occur. The harsh judgment I expected, mostly in my head. The exposure of my inadequacy. Turns out I was more capable than I'd given myself credit for. 6 weeks into the project, my manager called me into her office. My heart immediately started racing. This was it. She was going to tell me the project was failing, that I was in over my head, that I should have stuck to what I knew. Nathan, she said, I want to talk about your work on the system redesign. I know it's taking longer than expected. Stop. I'm not criticizing. I'm impressed. The approach you've taken is innovative. You're solving problems we didn't even know we had. And more than that, you've stepped up in ways I've never seen from you before. What changed? I sat there stunned. She was impressed. I decided to stop letting fear make my decisions. Well, keep it up, because this is the Nathan we need. The one who takes risks, who innovates, who doesn't play it safe all the time. I'm putting you up for senior engineer. You've earned it. Senior engineer. The promotion I'd wanted for years but had been too afraid to pursue. And it was coming. Not because I'd played it safe, but because I'd finally taken a risk. Walking out of her office, I felt something break open inside. All those years of fear-driven caution hadn't protected me. They'd limited me. And this one act of courage, of trusting God and moving forward despite fear, had opened doors I'd kept locked. But the real test came 2 days later. I was at a coffee shop when I saw her. Sarah, my ex-girlfriend. The woman I'd lost because I'd been too afraid to commit. She saw me at the same moment. For a second, we just stared at each other. Then she walked over. Nathan. Hi. Sarah. Hey. Awkward silence. Then she said, How have you been? Good. Different. I've been working on some things. Like what? And there it was. The moment. The old Nathan would have given a vague answer, would have protected himself from vulnerability, would have let fear keep him from honesty. But I was practicing something different now, like not letting fear control my life anymore, like learning to take risks, like realizing that you were right. I was too afraid to move forward, and I'm sorry. You deserved better than someone who was too scared to choose you. Sarah's eyes widened. Wow, I wasn't expecting that. I know. I'm different than I was. Not completely, I'm still working on it, but different enough that I can finally admit the truth. I was afraid of failing as a husband, of not being enough, of losing what we had, so I chose fear over you, and that was wrong. She sat down across from me. What changed? Over coffee, I told her everything, the sermon, James, the project, the practice of surrender. How God was slowly teaching me that fear wasn't protection, it was prison. She listened quietly. When I finished, she said, I'm glad you're doing this work. Really, you deserve to be free from whatever was holding you back. Sarah, I'm not telling you this because I expect anything. I know I hurt you. I know you've moved on. I haven't, actually. My heart stopped. What? I haven't moved on. I tried. I dated other people. But Nathan, I loved you. I still do, but I can't go back to how things were. I can't be with someone who's too afraid to build a life together. I understand, and I'm not asking you to. I just wanted you to know. I see it now. I see what fear cost me, cost us, and I'm working on it. Whether we ever have another chance or not, I'm working on it. We talked for another hour, about her life, about mine, about what we'd learned in 6 months apart. And when we finally said goodbye, there was something different in how we looked at each other. Not certainty, not a reunion, but possibility. Walking home that night, I felt the fear start to rise. What if she breaks my heart again? What if I'm setting myself up for more pain? What if this doesn't work out? And then, almost automatically now, I whispered, God, I'm afraid, but I give this to you. I trust you've gone before me. The fear didn't disappear. But it also didn't control me. I could feel it and choose courage anyway. That night I prayed differently than I'd prayed before, not asking God to take away the fear or make everything safe, but asking God to teach me what it meant to trust, to show me how to live courageously even when I was afraid, to help me believe that He really had gone before me, that I wasn't facing anything alone. I didn't know it then, but that prayer was the beginning of something profound. God was about to take me on a journey that would challenge every fear I'd been carrying, that would teach me what it really meant to surrender, that would show me the difference between safety and trust. The words were coming, the words that would change everything. Give me what scares you. I have already gone before you. But I wasn't ready to hear them yet. I had more to learn, more to surrender, more to trust. The journey was just beginning. 3 months after that first sermon, my life had changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. The project at work was exceeding expectations. My promotion to senior engineer was official. And Sarah and I had been slowly, carefully rebuilding, not rushing into anything, but honestly exploring whether we could have a different kind of relationship than the fear-based one we'd had before. But God wasn't done teaching me about fear. Not even close. It was a Tuesday morning when my phone rang. My mother. I almost didn't answer. We talked maybe once a month, brief and surface level. Our relationship had been strained since I'd moved to Seattle, or really strained my whole life because of how my father's criticism had shaped our family dynamics. "Nathan, it's your father. He had a heart attack. He's in the hospital. You need to come home." The words hit me like a physical blow. My father. The man whose impossible standards had created so much of my fear, the man I'd been avoiding for years because being around him meant constant reminders that I wasn't good enough. Is he going to be okay? They don't know yet. It was a major heart attack. "Nathan, you need to come, please." I booked a flight to Portland that afternoon. The whole time I was packing, my mind was racing. Fear upon fear upon fear. Fear of seeing him. Fear of him dying before we could resolve anything. Fear of him surviving and nothing changing. Fear of having to confront all the wounds his criticism had left. On the plane, I texted James, "My father had a heart attack. Flying to Portland. I'm terrified." His response came quickly. "God has gone before you even into this. Give him your fear. I'm praying." I sat there 30,000 feet in the air trying to pray. "God, I'm afraid of seeing him, of losing him, of all the unresolved pain between us. I don't know how to do this." And then, quietly in my spirit, I felt something. Not a voice exactly, but a knowing. I have already gone before you, even into that hospital room. Even into that pain. You don't go alone. When I arrived at the hospital, my mother was in the waiting room. She looked exhausted, older than I'd ever seen her. "How is he?" "Stable. For now. They did emergency surgery. The next 48 hours are critical. Nathan, he's been asking for you." "Asking for me? To criticize me even now?" "No, honey. He's scared. He almost died. And he keeps saying he needs to talk to you. That there are things he needs to say." My father's room was in the cardiac ICU. Machines beeped. Tubes ran everywhere, and there he was. The man who had loomed so large in my life, who had been the source of so much of my fear, looking small and fragile in a hospital bed. His eyes opened when I walked in. "Nathan, you came." "Of course I came, Dad. I didn't know if you would, after how I've been, how I've treated you." This was new territory. My father had never acknowledged his harshness, never apologized, never shown this kind of vulnerability. "Dad, you should rest." "No, I need to say this, in case I don't get another chance." He took a labored breath. "I was too hard on you, your whole life. I set impossible standards, criticized instead of encouraged, made you feel like you were never good enough. And I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry." I stood there, frozen. This was what I'd wanted to hear my entire life, but now that it was happening, I didn't know how to respond. 34 years of pain and fear and feelings of inadequacy, and suddenly an apology. "Why?" The word came out harsh. "Why were you like that? Why was nothing I did ever good enough?" Tears ran down his face. "Because nothing I did was ever good enough for my father. And instead of breaking that cycle, I perpetuated it. I thought I was preparing you for a hard world, but really, I was just passing on my own wounds, and I ruined you in the process. You didn't ruin me. Yes, I did. I made you afraid to fail, afraid to try, afraid to be yourself. I see it every time we talk, how careful you are around me, how you've built your whole life around avoiding criticism. And that's on me. That's my legacy. Fear." The machines beeped steadily. My mother had slipped out, giving us privacy, and I stood there face to face with the man who had shaped so much of my fear, hearing him finally acknowledge what he'd done. I don't know what to do with this, Dad. Forgive me, that's all I'm asking. I know I don't deserve it. I know it doesn't undo the damage. But Nathan, don't carry my wounds anymore. Don't let my failures keep defining your life. Forgive me and be free. I wanted to, God, I wanted to, but there was so much anger, so much pain, so many years of feeling inadequate. How do you just forgive that? I left the room and found a chapel in the hospital, sat in the silence, and prayed more honestly than I ever had before. God, I'm so angry at him, at myself for letting his opinion control me for so long, at how much fear he created in me. I want to forgive him. I know I should, but I don't know how. There's too much pain. And then, in that quiet chapel, I felt God speak to my heart, not audibly, but so clearly I couldn't miss it. Give me what scares you. Even this, even him, even the anger and the pain and the fear of what forgiving him means. I've already gone before you into this forgiveness. You don't do it alone. I sat with those words for a long time. Give me what scares you. I was scared of forgiving him. Scared that forgiveness meant saying what he did was okay. Scared that it meant being vulnerable again. Scared that nothing would really change. But God was asking me to give him that fear, to trust that he'd already gone before me even into this impossibly hard thing. Over the next 3 days, I stayed in Portland. My father's condition improved. He was going to survive. And every day I spent time in that chapel, wrestling with forgiveness. James called me. How you doing? My father apologized for everything, for all the criticism and impossible standards and making me feel inadequate. And I know I should forgive him, but I'm so angry, James, so hurt, and I'm afraid that if I forgive him, I'm saying what he did was okay. Forgiveness isn't saying it was okay. It's choosing to release the debt, to stop letting what he did control you. Nathan, you've been practicing surrender with your professional fears. Now, God's asking you to surrender your deepest wound, the source of so much of your fear. Can you give it to him? That night, I went back to the chapel, and this time, I prayed differently. God, I give you my anger at my father. I give you the pain of 34 years of feeling not good enough. I give you my fear of forgiving him. I give you my need for him to suffer the way I suffered. I give you all of it, because I can't carry it anymore, and I can't fix it myself. You've gone before me even into this, so I trust you with it. Something broke in me as I prayed. Tears I'd held back for years, anger I'd suppressed, pain I'd buried, all of it came pouring out in that empty chapel. And as it did, I felt something else, a gentle presence, love, not condoning what my father had done, but holding me through the grief of it. The next morning, I went to his room. He was awake, looking better. Dad, I want to talk about what you said, about forgiveness. He nodded, waiting. I forgive you, not because what you did was okay. It wasn't. Not because it doesn't still hurt, it does, but because I don't want to carry this anymore. I don't want your wounds to keep defining my life. I don't want fear to be your legacy in me. So I forgive you. And I'm choosing to believe that we can have something different going forward. He wept. Thank you, son. Thank you. I don't deserve it, but thank you. None of us deserve forgiveness, Dad, but God gives it anyway. I'm just trying to do the same. We talked for hours that day, really talked, maybe for the first time ever. He told me about his own father, even harsher than he'd been, about how he'd promised himself he'd be different, but had ended up perpetuating the same patterns, about his own fears and wounds and regrets. And I told him about my journey over the past few months, about learning to surrender fear, about the sermon that started everything, about James and the practice of trust, about how God was teaching me that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but choosing faith despite it. You're braver than I ever was, he said. I've spent my whole life trying to control everything through criticism and impossible standards, trying to prevent failure by never allowing room for it. But you're learning to trust instead of control, to surrender instead of grip. That's real courage. Coming from him, those words meant everything. On the flight back to Seattle 3 days later, I thought about what had happened. My father's heart attack had been terrifying, but it had also been necessary. Not the heart attack itself, but the crisis that finally broke open honesty between us. God had indeed gone before me into that hospital room, into that hard conversation, into that forgiveness I didn't think I could extend. And in the giving, I'd found freedom. The fear my father had planted in me, it was starting to lose its power, not all at once, but significantly. Sarah picked me up from the airport. I'd been texting her throughout the trip, and she knew everything that had happened. "How are you?" she asked, as we drove back to my apartment. Different, lighter, somehow. Like I've been carrying this weight for 34 years, and I finally put it down. "That's beautiful, Nathan. Really." We had dinner that night, and I told her everything, about the conversation with my father, about the forgiveness I'd extended, about how God was teaching me to surrender even the deepest fears. "I'm proud of you," she said. "The Nathan I knew 3 months ago couldn't have done this. He would have avoided the hospital, avoided the conversation, protected himself from the vulnerability. But you didn't. You showed up. You were honest. You chose forgiveness, even when it was hard. That's growth. I couldn't have done it without what I've been learning, about surrender, about trust, about how God goes before us, even into the scariest things." She reached across the table and took my hand. "Nathan, I want to tell you something. These past few months watching you change, it's given me hope that maybe we really could have something different than what we had before. But I need to know, are you ready? Really ready? To move forward even when it's scary?" My heart started racing. This was it. The question I'd been too afraid to answer before, and for the first time in my life, I didn't let fear make my decision. "Yes, I'm ready. I don't have it all figured out. I'm still learning. I'm still afraid sometimes. But I'm not letting that fear control me anymore. I love you, Sarah. I want to build a life with you, and I'm ready to choose courage over comfort." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Then let's try this again, but different this time. Better." That night, walking home, I prayed with gratitude. "God, you really do go before me, into the hard conversations, into the scary decisions, into the places I'm afraid to go. Thank you for teaching me to surrender the fear, for showing me that trust is stronger than control, for giving me courage I didn't know I had. I was learning, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely learning what it meant to give God what scared me, to trust that He'd already gone before me. The journey was far from over. There were bigger fears still to face, deeper surrenders still to make. But I was on the path, and for the first time in my life I wasn't walking it alone. God had gone before me, and He was leading me forward, one fear surrendered at a time. 6 months after that first sermon, my life looked completely different. Sarah and I had been dating again for 3 months, but this time everything felt different. I wasn't holding back out of fear. I was showing up fully, vulnerably, honestly, and she was doing the same. The relationship we were building wasn't perfect, but it was real, built on trust instead of fear, on courage instead of self-protection, on choosing each other even when it felt risky. At work, the system redesign project had been a massive success. My promotion had opened new doors. My manager was already talking about future leadership opportunities. And for the first time in my career, I wasn't afraid to step into them. But I was also learning that surrendering fear wasn't a one-time event. It was a daily practice, a constant choice. Because new fears kept emerging, and each one required its own surrender. It was a Saturday morning when James texted me, "Coffee? Want to talk about next steps?" We met at our usual spot. Over the past 6 months, James had become more than a friend. He was a mentor, a guide through this journey of learning to trust instead of fear. "You've made incredible progress," he said after we'd ordered. "The project, your relationship with Sarah, forgiving your father. But Nathan, I want to ask you something. What's the biggest fear you still haven't surrendered?" I sat with the question. There were still fears, certainly, but one rose above the others, bigger, deeper, more paralyzing than anything else. Commitment, marriage, actually proposing to Sarah and building a life together. I know I said I was ready, and I am, more ready than I've ever been, but there's still this voice that says, what if you fail? What if you're not enough? What if you repeat your father's patterns? James nodded. That makes sense. Marriage is the biggest vulnerability, the biggest risk, the biggest potential for both joy and pain. Of course you're afraid. So, how do I get past it? You don't get past it. You go through it. You feel the fear and choose commitment anyway. Nathan, you've been practicing surrender for 6 months now. Professional fears, relational fears, even the deep wound with your father. This is the next level, the biggest surrender. Are you ready? I don't know. That's the honest answer. I love Sarah. I want to marry her. But the fear of failing as a husband, it's huge. Let me ask you this. Has God gone before you into everything else you feared? Yes. The project? Yes. Rebuilding with Sarah? Yes. Forgiving your father? Yes. Then why wouldn't he go before you into marriage? Why wouldn't he be with you in building a life with Sarah? Nathan, the fear isn't evidence that you shouldn't do it. It's evidence that it matters, that it's important, that it's worth doing even though it's scary. His words hit deep. The fear wasn't a stop sign. It was an invitation to trust. That week, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Marriage, commitment, the life I wanted to build with Sarah but was still afraid to fully step into. On Wednesday night, Sarah and I had dinner at her apartment. We'd been talking about future plans, where we wanted to live, what kind of life we wanted to build, but always in abstract terms. Always someday instead of concrete commitments. After dinner, we were sitting on her couch, and she said something that changed everything. Nathan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay? Do you want to marry me? Not someday, not in theory. Actually marry me and build a life together? My heart started racing. This was the moment. The question I'd been avoiding for years. First by never proposing, then by losing her, now by rebuilding slowly but still not fully committing. Yes, I said. I do. Then why haven't you asked me? Because I'm afraid of failing, of not being good enough, of repeating my father's patterns, of... Nathan, stop. I know you're afraid, I can see it. But here's what I need you to understand. I'm afraid too. Marriage is scary for everyone. But I'm more afraid of spending my life waiting for you to overcome fear that might never completely go away. I'm more afraid of losing you again because you can't choose courage over comfort. She took my hand. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm not asking you to have no fear. I'm asking you to choose me despite the fear, to trust that we can figure it out together, to believe that love is stronger than whatever you're afraid of. Can you do that? I sat there feeling the weight of the moment. Everything in me wanted to say yes, to pull out a ring I didn't have and propose right then. But the fear was screaming. What if you fail her? What if you become like your father? What if you destroy this beautiful thing? And then, quieter but stronger, another voice. I have already gone before you, even into this. You don't go alone. Sarah, I want to. God, I want to. But I need some time. Not to decide whether I want to marry you, I know I do, but to fully surrender this fear, to do this right, to propose not out of pressure but out of genuine courage and commitment. Can you give me that? She studied my face for a long moment. How much time? A month. Give me 1 month, and I promise, whether the fear is completely gone or not, I'll give you an answer. A real answer, a committed answer. 1 month. She said. But Nathan, if you're not ready after that, I need to know. Because I can't keep waiting indefinitely. I understand, 1 month. The next day, I went to see James, told him about the conversation. She's right to push you, he said. Not because there's anything wrong with taking time, but because at some point, you have to choose. You have to decide that trust is more important than certainty. That commitment is more valuable than the absence of fear. So, how do I do it? How do I get to that place in 1 month? You practice, every day, surrendering this specific fear, and you get practical. You don't just think about marriage in abstract terms. You actually prepare for it. Buy the ring, Plan how you'll propose. Make it real instead of theoretical. Because when you make it concrete, you force yourself to confront the fear instead of just thinking about it. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I went ring shopping. Not browsing. Actually shopping with the intention to buy. The jeweler showed me options. I thought about Sarah, her style, her preferences, what would make her feel seen and known. And slowly, the theoretical idea of someday proposing became the very real possibility of proposing in 1 month. My hands were shaking as I chose the ring. My heart was racing as I paid for it. But underneath the fear, there was something else: excitement, hope, the sense that I was finally becoming the man I wanted to be, the man who chose courage over comfort. That night, I took the ring box home, sat with it in my apartment, and prayed more desperately than I'd prayed about anything. God, I'm terrified of marriage, of failing Sarah, of not being enough, of becoming my father, of destroying something beautiful. The fear is so big I can barely breathe. But I'm giving it to you, all of it. Every fear about marriage and commitment and failure and inadequacy. I'm giving it to you because I can't carry it and I can't fix it and I can't make it go away on my own. You've gone before me into every other scary thing, so I'm choosing to trust that you've gone before me into this too, that you'll be with me in marriage, that you'll help me be the husband Sarah deserves, that your love is big enough to cover my fear. I surrender this completely. Help me walk in courage instead of fear. Over the next 3 weeks, I practiced surrender every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. Every time the fear rose up, and it rose up constantly, I would literally say out loud, God, I'm afraid. I give this to you. I trust you've gone before me. I met with James weekly. He walked me through his own journey to marriage, how he'd been afraid too, how he'd had to choose trust over certainty, how marriage had actually been the place where he'd learned the deepest lessons about faith and surrender. I talked to my father on the phone, told him I was planning to propose, asked him what he wished he'd done differently in his own marriage. Don't lead with criticism, he said. Lead with love. Don't try to control everything. Trust her. Trust God. Trust that you'll figure things out together. And when you fail, because you will fail, apologize quickly and genuinely. Don't let pride keep you from saying you're sorry. His advice surprised me. This was the wisdom he'd learned too late. But he was giving it to me freely, hoping I'd do better than he had. I also met with the pastor from Grace Community, told him I was planning to propose, and asked if he'd do premarital counseling with Sarah and me. Of course, he said, but let me ask you something. Why do you want to marry Sarah? Because I love her. Because I want to build a life with her. Because she's the person I want to face everything with, the good and the hard and everything in between. And are you ready to do that even when it's scary, even when marriage brings up your deepest fears, even when it requires more surrender than you think you can give? No, I said honestly. I'm not ready. I'm terrified, but I'm choosing to do it anyway, because I'm learning that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's trusting God despite the fear. He smiled. That's exactly right. And that's the foundation of a strong marriage. Not fearlessness, but faith. Not certainty, but trust. You're going to do just fine. 3 weeks into the month, I'd planned everything. The location, a spot overlooking Puget Sound where Sarah and I had gone on our first date years ago. The timing, sunset on a Saturday. The words, practiced but from the heart, honest about my journey from fear to faith, specific about why I wanted to spend my life with her. But 2 days before I planned to propose, I woke up at 3 a.m. with panic crushing my chest. All the fears I'd been surrendering came flooding back at once. What if I fail her? What if I'm not capable of being a good husband? What if I repeat my father's patterns? What if marriage destroys what we have? What if? I got out of bed, sat in my living room in the darkness, and for a moment I considered calling the whole thing off, telling Sarah I needed more time, protecting myself from this enormous vulnerability. But then I remembered James's words. The fear isn't evidence that you shouldn't do it. It's evidence that it matters. And I remembered the sermon that started everything. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And I remembered every moment over the past 6 months when I'd felt this same paralyzing fear and had chosen surrender instead. The project, the conversation with my father, rebuilding with Sarah. Every single time God had been faithful. Every single time choosing courage over fear had led to freedom. I knelt on my living room floor at 3 a.m. and prayed, God, the fear is trying to win. It's trying to convince me to play it safe, to protect myself, to avoid this risk. But I'm not listening to it. I'm giving it to you. Again, for the 100th time. I'm choosing to trust that you've gone before me into marriage, that you'll be with me every step, that your love is bigger than my fear. Help me propose with courage. Help me step into this commitment fully, without holding back. Help me trust that you really have gone before me. And sitting there in the darkness, I felt it again, that quiet presence, not taking away the fear, but being with me in it, reminding me that I wasn't alone, that courage was possible, that trust was stronger than terror. Saturday came, the day I'd planned to propose. I picked Sarah up at 6 p.m. telling her we were going to dinner. She didn't know what was coming. We drove to the overlook above Puget Sound. The sun was just beginning to set, painting the water gold and pink. And Sarah realized where we were. Nathan, this is where we had our first date. I know. I wanted to come back here, to this place where everything started, because I want to start something new here too. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the ring box and got down on one knee. And despite the fear still whispering in the background, I spoke the words I'd prepared. Honest, vulnerable, specific. Sarah, 6 months ago, I was a man completely controlled by fear, afraid to take risks, afraid to commit, afraid to be vulnerable. And I lost you because of that fear. But God has been teaching me something, that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's trusting Him despite the fear. It's choosing love over self-protection. It's believing that He's gone before me, even into the scariest things. And this, proposing to you, asking you to build a life with me, choosing commitment over comfort, this is the scariest thing I've ever done. But I'm doing it anyway, because I love you. Because I want to face everything with you, because I believe that together, trusting God, we can build something beautiful. I'm not perfect. I'm still learning. I still get afraid sometimes, but I'm not letting that fear control me anymore. I'm choosing you fully, completely, without holding back. Sarah, will you marry me? She was crying. I was crying. The sunset was blazing behind us, and for a moment that felt eternal. She just looked at me, taking in everything I'd said, everything I'd become over the past 6 months, everything I was offering her. Then she said the words that changed everything. Yes, yes, Nathan, I'll marry you. I put the ring on her finger. We kissed as the sun set over Puget Sound. And I felt something I'd never felt before in my entire life, complete freedom from fear. Not because the fear was gone, but because I'd chosen courage despite it, because I'd surrendered it to God, because I'd finally learned that trust was stronger than terror. That night we called our families. My father cried, tears of joy and maybe redemption, knowing his son was breaking the patterns he'd created. My mother was thrilled. Sarah's parents welcomed me into their family with open arms. And I called James. I did it, I proposed. She said yes. I'm so proud of you, brother. You faced your biggest fear, and you chose courage. That's what this journey is about. Thank you for everything, for showing me what surrender looks like, for walking with me through all of it. That night, lying in bed, engaged to the woman I loved, I prayed with gratitude deeper than I'd ever felt. God, you really do go before me, into every scary thing. You were with me in that proposal. You gave me courage I didn't know I had. You helped me choose trust over fear. Thank you for everything, for this journey, for teaching me to surrender, for showing me that your love really is stronger than my fear. 6 months. From a man controlled by fear to a man learning courage. From someone who avoided commitment to someone choosing it fully. From playing it safe to stepping into the biggest risk of my life. The journey wasn't over. Marriage would bring new fears, new opportunities for surrender, but I was ready, because I'd learned the truth that changed everything. God goes before me, even into the scariest things. I never face anything alone, and that truth, that simple, profound truth, made all the difference. The first 3 months of engagement were everything I'd hoped for, and more. Sarah and I dove into wedding planning with joy I didn't know was possible. We attended premarital counseling with Pastor Mike every week, doing the hard work of learning how to build a marriage on trust instead of fear. But I was also discovering something important. Surrendering fear in one area didn't mean fear disappeared from all areas. It meant I had the tools to recognize it and surrender it again, and again, and again. It was during our 4th counseling session that Pastor Mike asked a question that stopped me cold. "Nathan, Sarah's told me about your career success, the promotion, the project leadership, but I'm curious. What's next for you professionally? Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" I'd been avoiding thinking about that question, because the answer scared me more than anything I'd faced yet. I don't know. Sarah looked at me, surprised. We'd talked about everything. Where we'd live, how many kids we wanted, what kind of life we'd build together. But I'd never told her about the dream I'd been carrying for years, the one I was too afraid to pursue. "Nathan," Pastor Mike said gently, "that hesitation, I recognize it. That's fear. What aren't you saying?" I took a deep breath. "There's something I've wanted to do for years, since college, but I've been too afraid to try." "What is it?" Sarah asked. "I want to start my own company, a software startup. I have an idea, a platform that could genuinely help people. I've had the concept mapped out for 3 years. I've done the market research. I know it could work, but I've never acted on it because what if I fail? What if I lose everything? What if I'm not capable of running a company?" Sarah's eyes widened. "You've never told me this." "I know. I'm sorry. I've been too afraid to even say it out loud, because saying it makes it real. And making it real means I have to decide whether to do it or keep living with regret." Pastor Mike leaned forward. "Nathan, let me ask you this. If you knew you couldn't fail, would you start this company?" "In a heartbeat." "Then the only thing stopping you is fear. The same fear you've been surrendering for the past 9 months. The question is, are you willing to surrender this one too?" That night, Sarah and I talked for hours. I told her everything. About the platform I wanted to build, about how it could help small businesses manage their operations more efficiently, about the market opportunity, about how I'd been carrying this dream but had been too paralyzed by fear to pursue it. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked. "Because I was ashamed. Ashamed that I had this dream but was too afraid to chase it. Ashamed that I was settling for a safe job instead of risking everything for something I actually believed in. Nathan, listen to me. I didn't fall in love with you because you played it safe. I fell in love with the man you're becoming, the one who faces his fears and chooses courage anyway. If you want to start this company, I support you. Completely. But Sarah, it's risky. Really risky. I'd have to leave my job. We'd lose my salary while I build this. It could take years before it's profitable. What if it fails? What if I lose everything and we're starting our marriage in financial ruin?" She took my hands. "Or what if it succeeds? What if this is exactly what you're supposed to do? What if God has been preparing you for this? All the fear you've been learning to surrender, all the courage you've been developing, what if it's all been leading to this?" "I'm terrified." "I know, but you've been terrified before. And every time, you've chosen to trust God and move forward anyway. Why would this be different?" Over the next 2 weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The startup. The dream I'd been carrying. The fear that kept me from pursuing it. I met with James, told him everything. "Here's what I'm hearing," he said. "You've spent 9 months learning to surrender fear, professional fear when you took on that project. Relational fear when you proposed to Sarah, deep personal fear when you forgave your father. And now God's asking, will you surrender this one too? Will you trust me with your biggest dream? But this is different. This isn't just about me. This affects Sarah, our future, our financial security. Nathan, let me tell you something. The biggest regrets in my life aren't the risks I took that didn't work out. They're the dreams I was too afraid to pursue. The what-ifs that haunt me aren't what if I'd played it safer. They're what if I'd been braver. Don't let fear steal your dream. Don't let it make you settle for less than what God's calling you to. That Sunday, the sermon was about the parable of the talents. About the servants who invested what they were given versus the one who buried it out of fear. Pastor Mike's words hit me like a hammer. The servant who buried his talent wasn't punished for failing. He was punished for not trying, for letting fear keep him from using what he'd been given. The same is true for us. God doesn't call us to play it safe. He calls us to steward what He's given us, to invest it, to risk it, to use it for His purposes, even when we're afraid of failure. After the service, I sat in my car for a long time, and I prayed more honestly than I'd prayed about anything except proposing to Sarah. God, I have this dream, this vision for a company that could help people, and I've been too afraid to pursue it, too afraid of failing, too afraid of losing everything, too afraid of not being enough. But I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. I'm tired of playing it safe when you're calling me to courage. I'm tired of burying what you've given me because I'm afraid of losing it. So I'm giving this to you, the dream, the fear, the risk, all of it. If you want me to start this company, I'll do it. Even though I'm terrified, even though it might fail, even though it's the biggest risk I've ever taken. I trust that you've gone before me, that you'll be with me, that your plan is better than my safety. Show me if this is what you want, and if it is, give me the courage to do it. 2 days later, I got a call from an old college friend, Marcus. We hadn't talked in over a year. "Nathan, man, I've been thinking about you. How you doing?" We caught up for a few minutes. Then Marcus said something that made my heart stop. "Listen, I'm calling because I heard through the grapevine that you've been working on some kind of business operations platform. Is that true?" "How did you hear about that?" "Mike Chen mentioned it. Said you told him about the concept a couple years ago." "Nathan, I'm a venture capitalist now. We invest in early-stage startups. And what Mike described, that's exactly the kind of thing we're looking for. Would you be willing to pitch it to me?" I sat there, stunned. I'd never told Marcus about my startup idea. I'd barely told anyone. But somehow, through a chain of connections I hadn't orchestrated, an opportunity was opening. "Marcus, I haven't even started building it yet. I've just been conceptualizing." "That's fine. We invest in ideas, not just products. If the concept is solid and you have a plan, that's enough. Can you put together a pitch deck? Let me take a look?" Yes, I can do that." After we hung up, I just sat there. This wasn't coincidence. This was God, opening a door, confirming that maybe, just maybe, this dream wasn't just mine. Maybe it was something He'd planted in me, something He wanted me to pursue. I called Sarah immediately, told her about Marcus's call. "Nathan, this is God. You know that, right? You prayed for confirmation. You asked God to show you if this is what He wants. And 2 days later, a venture capitalist calls you asking to see your pitch. That's not coincidence. That's an answer. But I still have to quit my job, still have to take the risk, still have to actually do this terrifying thing." "Yes, but you don't do it alone. God's gone before you, and I'm with you. We do this together." Over the next 2 weeks, I built a pitch deck, market analysis, product roadmap, financial projections, team structure, everything Marcus would need to evaluate the opportunity. And every step of the way, I practiced surrender, because the fear was enormous. Fear of failing, fear of looking foolish, fear of losing financial security, fear of disappointing Sarah, fear of proving all my doubts right. But I'd learned something over the past 9 months. Fear doesn't go away. You just get better at choosing courage despite it. I pitched to Marcus 3 weeks later, presented the full vision, what the platform would do, who it would serve, how it would make money, why now was the right time. He listened carefully, asked hard questions, pushed back on my projections, challenged my assumptions. Then he said, "Nathan, this is really good. Better than I expected. You've clearly thought this through. I want to invest. Seed round, $500,000. Enough to get you started. Hire a small team. Build a minimum viable product." I couldn't breathe. $500,000? You're serious? Completely serious. On one condition: you have to quit your job and do this full time. No side hustle. Full commitment. Can you do that? There it was. The moment I'd been both hoping for and dreading. The offer was real. The funding was there. The only thing standing between me and my dream was my willingness to take the leap. "Can I have a week to think about it?" "1 week, then I need an answer," I told Sarah that night. She cried. Happy tears, excited tears, scared tears, all mixed together. "This is it," she said. "This is what you've been afraid of your whole life. The big risk. The leap of faith. Are you going to do it?" "I don't know. I want to. But Sarah, what if I fail? What if I take this money and the company crashes and I've quit a good job for nothing?" "Then you fail. And we figure it out together. But Nathan, what if you don't fail? What if this is exactly what God has been preparing you for? What if this dream becomes reality because you were finally brave enough to chase it?" Over the next week, I sought advice from everyone I trusted. James said to do it. Pastor Mike said to do it. My father, surprisingly, said to do it. Don't live with regret like I did. Take the risk. Chase the dream. But the person whose opinion mattered most was Sarah. And she'd already made her position clear. She believed in me. She believed in the dream. She believed God was in this. 6 days after Marcus's offer, I went to the overlook above Puget Sound, the same place where I'd proposed, and I prayed. "God, this is the biggest thing you've ever asked me to surrender. Not just fear of marriage or fear of forgiveness, but fear of chasing my biggest dream, fear of risking everything for something I believe in, fear of becoming who you created me to be. I've been carrying this dream for years, but I've been too afraid to pursue it, too afraid of failing, too afraid of not being enough, too afraid that if I try and fail, I'll prove all my doubts right. But I'm done living that way. I'm done letting fear steal my dreams. I'm done playing it safe when you're calling me to courage, so I'm giving this to you, completely. The dream, the risk, the fear, the outcome, all of it. I trust that you've gone before me, that you opened this door, that you'll be with me every step, that even if I fail, you'll use it for something good. I'm doing this, not because I'm not afraid, but because I'm choosing to trust you more than I fear failure. The next morning, I walked into my manager's office. My hands were shaking, but my resolve was firm. "I need to give you my notice. I'm leaving to start my own company." She looked surprised. "Nathan, you're doing so well here. We're grooming you for director level." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. This is something I need to do, a dream I've been carrying too long. Well, I'm sad to lose you, but I respect this. It takes courage to leave security for a dream. I hope it works out." 2 weeks later, I worked my last day, cleaned out my desk, said goodbye to colleagues, and drove home unemployed for the first time in my adult life. Sarah was waiting when I got home. "How do you feel?" "Terrified, excited, free, all of it at once." "That's courage, feeling the fear and doing it anyway." I called Marcus that afternoon. "I'm in. Let's do this." The next 3 months were a whirlwind, setting up the company, hiring a small team, building the first version of the platform, working 16-hour days, dealing with setbacks and breakthroughs in equal measure. And through it all, I practiced surrender every day, multiple times a day, because the fear never fully went away. Every challenge brought new doubts. Every setback whispered that I'd made a mistake. Every hard decision made me question whether I was capable of this. But I'd learned the practice. "God, I'm afraid. I give this to you. I trust you've gone before me. 5 months after quitting my job, we launched the beta version of the platform. 20 small businesses signed up in the first week, 50 within a month. They loved it. The feedback was incredible. The product was working. Marcus was thrilled. Nathan, this is exactly what we hoped for. You're onto something real here. We're going to do a Series A funding round. Scale this thing. One night, Sarah and I were sitting on our couch, exhausted but happy. The company was growing. Our wedding was 3 months away. Life was full and challenging and beautiful. You did it, she said. You faced your biggest fear. You took the risk. You chased the dream. And it's working. We did it. I couldn't have done this without you, without your belief in me, without your willingness to take this risk with me. You know what I've learned watching you, she said. Courage isn't something you have or don't have. It's something you practice. You practice surrendering fear. You practice trusting God. You practice choosing courage even when you're terrified. And over time it becomes more natural. Not easy, but natural. That night, I prayed with gratitude deeper than I'd ever felt. God, you really did go before me. Into this risk. Into this dream. You opened doors I couldn't have opened. You provided in ways I couldn't have planned. You gave me courage I didn't know I had. Thank you for teaching me to surrender fear, for showing me that trust is stronger than terror, for proving that you really are faithful, for giving me a dream and then giving me the courage to chase it. 9 months ago, I was a man controlled by fear, afraid to take risks, afraid to commit, afraid to become who you created me to be, but you've transformed me, not by taking away the fear, but by teaching me to trust you despite it. Keep teaching me, keep leading me, keep showing me what it means to surrender fear and walk in courage, because this journey, it's just beginning. And it was. The company would grow. Marriage would bring new challenges and joys. Life would continue to present opportunities to choose courage over fear. But I'd learned the truth that changed everything. God goes before me, into every scary thing, every risk, every dream. I never face anything alone. And that truth, that simple, profound, transformative truth, made all the difference. 1 year after that first sermon that changed everything, Sarah and I stood at the altar. Grace Community Church was packed with family and friends who'd witnessed my transformation from a man controlled by fear to someone learning to walk in courage. Pastor Mike smiled at us as he began the ceremony. A year ago, Nathan walked into this church for the first time, carrying fears that had controlled him his entire life. Today, he stands here as a man who's learned what it means to surrender those fears to God. And that transformation, that journey from fear to faith, is what makes this marriage so beautiful, because marriage isn't built on the absence of fear. It's built on the courage to commit anyway. As I looked at Sarah, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The sermon about Joshua and courage, meeting James, taking on the project at work, forgiving my father, proposing despite terror, starting the company. Each step had required surrender. Each one had taught me that God really does go before us. We exchanged vows, not traditional ones, but personal promises we'd written ourselves. When it was my turn, I spoke words that came from the deepest place in my heart. Sarah, a year ago, I was too afraid to commit to you. Too afraid of failing as a husband, too afraid of not being enough. But God has taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's trusting Him despite the fear. So today I promise you this. I will choose courage over comfort. I will choose vulnerability over self-protection. I will choose to trust God with our future instead of trying to control it through fear. I will fail sometimes, but I won't let fear keep me from trying. I love you, and I choose you every day for the rest of my life. Sarah's vows were equally beautiful, equally vulnerable, and when Pastor Mike pronounced us husband and wife, I felt something profound. Freedom. Complete, total freedom from the fear that had controlled me for 34 years. The reception was a celebration not just of our marriage, but of transformation. James gave a toast that had everyone in tears. I met Nathan 10 months ago, when he was just beginning to learn what surrender looks like. And I've watched him choose courage again and again, in his career, in his relationships, in his faith, in his dreams. Today, as he commits to Sarah, he's choosing the biggest courage of all, the courage to build a life with someone, knowing it will be messy and hard and beautiful. Nathan, you've become the man God created you to be, and Sarah, you've been patient and brave enough to walk with him through that becoming. This marriage is going to be extraordinary. My father also spoke. Standing at the microphone, looking healthier than he'd been in years since the heart attack, he said words I never thought I'd hear. My son taught me something this year. He taught me that it's never too late to change, that you can break patterns that have been in your family for generations, that courage is more powerful than fear. Nathan, I'm sorry for the years I spent making you afraid. But I'm so proud of the man you've become, a man who faces his fears instead of being controlled by them, a man who chooses trust over terror. Sarah, you're getting an extraordinary husband, not perfect, but brave, and that's worth everything. The honeymoon was 2 weeks in Italy, a place Sarah had always wanted to go, but I'd been too afraid to commit to because of the expense and the time away from work. But I was different now. The company was in good hands with my team, and I'd learned that experiences with Sarah mattered more than playing it safe. We explored Rome, Florence, Venice, and every day I practiced being present instead of anxious, enjoying the moment instead of worrying about what could go wrong, trusting that God had everything under control instead of trying to manage every detail myself. One evening in Florence, sitting at a cafe overlooking the Arno River, Sarah said, "You're different than you were even 6 months ago. More relaxed, more present, less controlled by fear. I'm still afraid sometimes, but I'm getting better at recognizing it and surrendering it, instead of letting it make my decisions. I know. And watching you do that, watching you practice courage, it makes me braver too. You're teaching me that fear doesn't have to win." When we returned to Seattle, real life began. Not the honeymoon phase, but the actual work of building a marriage and a company simultaneously. And I quickly discovered that surrendering fear wasn't a one-time achievement. It was a daily, sometimes hourly practice. The company was growing fast, too fast maybe. We'd gone from 5 employees to 20 in 6 months, from 20 beta customers to 200 paying clients. Revenue was up, but so was complexity, so were challenges, so were opportunities to let fear drive my decisions. My biggest fear as CEO was letting people down. My team, our customers, our investors. What if I made the wrong strategic decision? What if I hired the wrong person? What if I led us in a direction that failed? In a Monday morning leadership meeting, my head of engineering, Rachel, presented a proposal that terrified me. We need to completely rebuild our core platform. The current architecture can't scale to where we're going. It'll take 6 months and significant resources. But if we don't do it now, we'll hit a ceiling that could kill the company. Everything in me wanted to say no. It was too risky, too expensive, too uncertain. What if we spent 6 months rebuilding and it didn't work? What if customers left because we weren't adding new features? What if we ran out of money before we finished? But I'd learned to recognize that voice. It was fear, the same fear that had kept me from taking the project at work, from proposing to Sarah, from starting the company. Fear dressed up as prudence. "Give me 24 hours, I said. "I need to think about this." That night, I told Sarah about the decision, about how afraid I was of making the wrong choice. "What does your gut tell you?" she asked. "That Rachel's right, that we need to rebuild, that it's the smart long-term decision, even though it's scary short-term." "Then what are you actually afraid of? That I'll make the decision, and it'll fail, and everyone will see I was wrong, that I'm not capable of leading through something this big, that I'm going to let everyone down." Nathan, listen to yourself. That's the same fear you've been surrendering for a year. The fear of not being enough, of failing, of being exposed as inadequate. But you know what? You've faced that fear again and again, and every time God's been faithful. Why would this be different? She was right. This was the same fear, just in a new context, and I knew what I needed to do. I went for a walk along Puget Sound, and I prayed the prayer I'd prayed so many times over the past year. God, I'm afraid of making this decision, of it failing, of letting people down, of proving I'm not capable of this. But I'm giving it to you. I trust that you've gone before me, that you'll guide this decision, that even if it fails, you'll use it for something good. I choose to trust you over my fear. The next morning, I told Rachel to move forward with the rebuild. It's the right decision. It's scary, but it's right. Over the next 6 months, that decision was tested again and again. The rebuild was harder than expected, took longer than planned, cost more than budgeted. There were moments when I was convinced I'd made a catastrophic mistake, but we pushed through. And when we finally launched the new platform, it was everything Rachel had promised. Faster, more stable, infinitely more scalable. Customers loved it. New clients signed up at twice the previous rate. And within 3 months, we'd recouped the investment and were growing faster than ever. Marcus called me after the launch. Nathan, that was a gutsy decision, rebuilding the platform when you were already growing. Most CEOs wouldn't have had the courage, but you made the right call. This positions you for massive growth. We're ready to lead your Series A, $10 million. $10 million. A year ago, I'd been afraid to take on a challenging project. Now I was running a company raising $10 million. The growth was almost overwhelming, but the bigger test came not at work, but at home. 3 months after we launched the new platform, Sarah sat me down for a serious conversation. Nathan, we need to talk about something. My heart immediately started racing. Those words, we need to talk, always triggered fear. What had I done wrong? What was she unhappy about? Was our marriage in trouble? I'm pregnant. The world stopped. Pregnant. We'd talked about kids, wanted them eventually, but eventually had always meant someday when we're more ready. Not now. Not when the company was growing so fast. Not when I was working 70-hour weeks. Not when I was still learning how to be a husband. Sarah watched my face carefully. You're scared. I'm terrified. Sarah, I don't know how to be a father. What if I repeat my father's patterns? What if I make our kid afraid, like he made me afraid? What if I'm working so much on the company that I miss everything? What if I'm not ready for this? She took my hands. Nathan, do you remember what you told me when you proposed? That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's trusting God despite the fear. This is that moment again. We're both scared, but we're also excited. And we're going to figure this out together, trusting that God's gone before us, even into parenthood. Over the next week, I wrestled with every fear I had about becoming a father. Fear of not being present enough. Fear of repeating my father's critical patterns. Fear of damaging a child the way I'd been damaged. Fear of not knowing what I was doing. Fear of failing at the most important job I'd ever have. I called my father, told him about the pregnancy, and asked him the question I needed answered. Dad, how do I not repeat your mistakes? How do I not make my kid afraid? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, by doing what you've been doing all year, recognizing when fear is driving you and choosing something different, by being present instead of distant, by encouraging instead of criticizing, by showing your child that mistakes are for learning, not for shame, by modeling what it looks like to surrender fear to God instead of controlling everything. Nathan, you've already broken the pattern. You just have to keep living what you've learned. I also talked to James. I'm going to be a father, and I'm terrified. Of course you are. Every good father is terrified at first. But Nathan, think about what you've learned this year, about surrender, about trust, about courage. Those same principles apply to parenting. You're going to make mistakes, every parent does, but you're not going to parent out of fear and control like your father did. You're going to parent out of love and trust, and that's going to make all the difference. Sunday's sermon was about fear and faith. Pastor Mike preached on Peter walking on water, how he stepped out of the boat in faith, but then sank when he looked at the circumstances instead of at Jesus. Fear comes, Pastor Mike said, when we focus on the waves instead of on Jesus. When we look at all the things that could go wrong instead of trusting that God is bigger than our circumstances. Peter didn't sink because he got scared. He sank because he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on his fear instead. The words hit me exactly where I needed them. I'd been looking at the waves, all the things that could go wrong with becoming a father, all the ways I could fail, all my inadequacies. I needed to look at Jesus instead, to trust that God had gone before me, even into parenthood. That night I put my hand on Sarah's stomach and prayed out loud, God, I'm afraid of being a father, afraid of not being enough, afraid of repeating my father's mistakes, afraid of failing this child before they're even born. But I'm giving you those fears. I'm trusting that you've gone before us into parenthood, that you'll teach us how to do this, that you'll help us raise this child in love instead of fear. Thank you for this gift. Help us trust you with it. Sarah was crying. That's the prayer I needed to hear, because I'm scared too. But we're doing this together, and we're trusting God together. Over the next few months, as Sarah's pregnancy progressed, I practiced surrender daily. Every ultrasound brought new fears. What if something's wrong? Every doctor's appointment triggered anxiety. What if there are complications? Every thought about the future raised questions. How will we manage a baby and a company? How will I be present for both? But I kept returning to the practice I'd learned. God, I'm afraid. I give this to you. I trust you've gone before me. The company continued to grow. The Series A funding closed. We hired more people, opened a larger office, launched new features, and through it all, I had to constantly choose. Would I parent out of fear and control, working obsessively to provide security? Or would I parent out of trust, being present for what mattered most? I made a decision 6 months into Sarah's pregnancy. I talked to my leadership team. I'm going to take paternity leave when the baby comes. 3 months, full-time with Sarah and the baby. No work except emergencies. My CFO looked shocked. Nathan, you're the CEO. We're in a critical growth phase. 3 months is a long time. I know. But this is more important. I've spent my whole life letting fear drive my decisions. Fear of not being successful enough. Fear of not providing enough. Fear of not being enough. But I'm choosing differently. I'm choosing to be present for my family. I'm trusting that the company will be fine with our team leading it. Because if I can't trust the people I've hired to run things for 3 months, then I've built the wrong team. Rachel, my head of engineering, smiled. That's leadership, Nathan. Not controlling everything but empowering people. We've got this. Go be a dad. 1 year and 3 months after that first sermon, Sarah went into labor. We rushed to the hospital, both terrified and excited, and 12 hours later, I held my daughter for the first time. Emma Grace, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Perfect in every way. As I looked at her tiny face, I felt overwhelming love mixed with overwhelming fear. This little person was completely dependent on me. What if I failed her? What if I wasn't enough? But then I remembered everything I'd learned over the past year. Fear doesn't have to win. Courage is choosing trust despite terror. God goes before me, even into the scariest things. I held Emma close and whispered to her, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to get things wrong sometimes. I'm going to be afraid a lot. But I promise you this, I won't parent out of fear. I won't make you feel like you have to be perfect. I won't criticize you into insecurity. I will love you. I will be present with you. I will show you what it looks like to surrender fear and trust God. I will teach you that courage is stronger than terror, and I will believe in you even when you don't believe in yourself. Sarah was watching me, tears streaming down her face. You're going to be an amazing father. Because you've learned what your father never learned, that love casts out fear. That night, after Sarah and Emma were both sleeping, I stood by the window in the hospital room, looking out at Seattle, and I prayed with gratitude so deep I could barely contain it. God, you really did go before me, into the project that started this whole journey, into reconciliation with my father, into proposing to Sarah, into starting the company, into becoming a father. Every scary thing, you went before me. A year ago, I was a man controlled by fear, paralyzed by it, defined by it. But you've transformed me, not by taking away the fear, but by teaching me that trust is stronger, that courage is possible, that surrender is the path to freedom. I'm holding my daughter, this beautiful, perfect, terrifying gift, and I'm still afraid. Afraid of all the ways I could fail her. But I'm not letting that fear control me. I'm choosing to trust you with her, with our family, with everything. Thank you for everything. For the sermon that woke me up, for James who showed me what surrender looks like, for Sarah who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, for my father's transformation that showed me change is possible, for the company that taught me to chase dreams despite fear, and for Emma who's teaching me that the biggest love requires the biggest courage. Keep teaching me, keep leading me, keep showing me what it means to surrender fear and walk in faith. Because this journey, it's just beginning, and I trust you've gone before me into whatever comes next. 1 year and 3 months, from a man drowning in fear to a man learning courage, from someone who avoided risk to someone who embraced it, from playing it safe to chasing dreams, from isolation to marriage, from employee to founder, from son to father. The transformation was profound, but the journey wasn't over. There would be more fears to surrender, more courage to choose, more moments to trust that God had gone before me, but I'd learned the truth that changed everything. God goes before me, into every scary thing. I never face anything alone. And that truth, that simple, profound, life-altering truth, made all the difference. 18 months after that first sermon, I was sitting in a rocking chair at 3 a.m., holding Emma as she slept on my chest. This had become my favorite time, the quiet hours when the world was still, when it was just me and my daughter, when I could pray and reflect on how much had changed. Fatherhood had been everything I'd feared and more than I'd hoped for. The fear of not being enough, still there. The fear of repeating my father's patterns, constant vigilance required. But I was learning to parent out of love instead of fear, out of trust instead of control. The company was thriving. The Series A funding had enabled us to scale faster than I'd imagined. We now had 50 employees, 500 customers, and revenue growing 30% month over month. Marcus was already talking about Series B, but success brought new fears. Fear of growing too fast, fear of losing what made us special, fear of not being able to sustain this momentum, fear that I was in over my head. And then there was the fear I hadn't expected, fear of what God might ask me to do next. It started with a conversation at church. I'd been attending Grace Community for 18 months now, and I'd gotten involved in men's ministry. Every Wednesday morning, a group of us met to study scripture and encourage each other. I'd been sharing my story, the journey from fear to faith, and guys had been responding powerfully. One morning, Pastor Mike pulled me aside after the men's group. "Nathan, can we talk in my office?" My first instinct was fear. Was something wrong? Had I done something? But I recognized that voice now. It was the old fear trying to control me through anxiety. In his office, Pastor Mike got straight to the point. "Nathan, I've been watching your journey. The transformation God's done in you is remarkable, and I've noticed something. When you share your story, people respond. They see themselves in your struggle with fear. They find hope in your journey to courage. Thank you. I'm just trying to be honest about what God's done. I want to ask you something. Have you ever considered that God might be calling you to ministry? Not full-time necessarily, but using your story more intentionally to help others?" My heart started racing. "What do you mean?" "We're starting a new group, a recovery-style meeting for people struggling with fear and anxiety. We need someone to lead it, someone who's been there, someone who can model what surrender looks like." "Nathan, I think that someone is you." Everything in me wanted to say no. I wasn't qualified. I wasn't a pastor or counselor. I was just a guy who'd been learning to surrender fear for 18 months. What if I said something wrong? What if I couldn't help people? What if I failed? I don't know, Pastor Mike. I'm not trained for this. I'm still figuring it out myself. That's exactly why you're the right person. People don't need an expert who has it all figured out. They need someone who's honest about the struggle and can point them to God. Will you pray about it? Yes, I'll pray about it. That night, I told Sarah about the conversation. She listened carefully, then said, "What are you afraid of? That I'm not qualified, that I'll let people down, that I don't have anything valuable to offer?" Nathan, listen to yourself. Those are the same fears you've been surrendering for 18 months. Fear of not being enough, fear of failing, fear of being exposed as inadequate. But you know what? God's been faithful through every other thing He's asked you to do. Why would this be different? She was right. This was the same fear pattern, just in a new context. Over the next week, I prayed about it constantly. God, is this you? Are you calling me to lead this group? Because I'm terrified. I don't feel qualified. I don't know what I'm doing. But if this is you, I'll do it. I'll trust that you've gone before me even into this. The answer came during my quiet time one morning. I was reading in 2 Corinthians, and these words jumped off the page. "Praise be to the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." That was it. I didn't need to be an expert. I just needed to share the comfort I'd received, the surrender I'd learned, the courage God had given me. I called Pastor Mike that afternoon. "I'll do it. I'll lead the group." The first meeting was terrifying. 12 people showed up, men and women of all ages, all carrying fears that controlled their lives. As I looked at them, I saw myself 18 months ago, paralyzed, desperate, hungry for freedom but not knowing how to find it. I shared my story, not the polished version but the raw one, about the fear that had controlled me for 34 years. About losing Sarah because I was too afraid to commit, about the sermon that woke me up, about learning to practice surrender, about every scary thing God had walked me through. When I finished, the room was silent. Then a woman in her 50s started crying. That's me. Every word of that is me. I've been controlled by fear my whole life. I didn't know it was possible to live differently. A man in his 30s said, "How do you do it? How do you actually surrender fear? It sounds good in theory, but how do you make it real?" And I realized this was why God had called me to this. Not because I had all the answers, but because I'd learned the practice, the daily, sometimes hourly, discipline of giving fear to God. "It's a practice," I said. "Every time fear rises up, you recognize it and give it to God, out loud if you can. God, I'm afraid of this. I give it to you. I trust you've gone before me." You do that again and again until it becomes more automatic, until choosing courage becomes more natural than choosing fear. And over the next 6 months, that group became one of the most important things in my life. We met every Tuesday night. I taught them what I'd learned, not from a place of expertise, but from a place of fellow traveler, and I watched people transform. A woman named Lisa, who'd been paralyzed by fear of her adult children's choices, learning to release control and trust God with their lives. A man named Derek, who'd been afraid to leave an abusive job, finally quitting and finding work that honored his dignity. A college student named Maya, who'd been terrified of failing, taking risks and discovering she was more capable than she'd believed. Their transformations encouraged me more than my teaching encouraged them. Seeing God do in their lives what He'd done in mine. It was proof that this wasn't just my story. It was God's pattern. He meets people in their fear and teaches them courage. But leading the group also stretched me in unexpected ways, because I couldn't teach surrender without continuing to practice it myself, and God kept giving me new opportunities. The company hit a crisis in month 20. A major competitor launched a similar product with significantly more funding. Our growth slowed, customer acquisition costs increased, and for the first time since we'd started, I faced the real possibility of failure. In a leadership meeting, my CFO laid out the stark reality: if we don't close another funding round in the next 6 months, we'll run out of money. And with this new competition, investors are getting nervous. Nathan, we need a plan. The old fear surged. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of when I'd started the company. What if I'd made a mistake? What if I'd risked everything for nothing? What if the company failed and I let everyone down? My team, our investors, our customers. But I'd learned to recognize that voice. It was fear, trying to control me through catastrophizing. That night, I went for a long walk along Puget Sound, the same place where I'd proposed to Sarah, the same place where I'd prayed about starting the company, and I had the most honest conversation with God I'd had in months. God, I'm terrified. The company might fail. Everything I've built might fall apart. I could lose everything. And I'm afraid that means I made a mistake, that I shouldn't have taken this risk, that I'm not capable of this. But I'm giving this to you, the company, the fear of failure, the outcome, all of it. If this company fails, I'll trust that you have something else for me. If it succeeds, I'll trust that you're doing it, not me. Either way, I'm choosing to trust you instead of fear. The peace that came after that prayer was surprising. Not certainty that everything would work out, but confidence that I wasn't alone, that God had gone before me, even into potential failure. The next day, I gathered my leadership team. Here's what we're going to do. We're not going to panic. We're not going to make desperate decisions out of fear. We're going to stick to our vision, improve our product, serve our customers excellently, and trust that if we do the right things, the right outcome will follow. Rachel asked, "What if that's not enough? What if we do everything right and still fail? Then we fail having done our best, and we learn from it, and we move forward. But we don't make decisions out of fear. We make them out of trust. Trust in our vision, trust in our team, and trust that God's with us whatever happens." Over the next 4 months, we worked harder and smarter than ever before. We improved our product. We focused on customer success. We told our story authentically instead of trying to compete dollar for dollar with our competitor. And something unexpected happened. Customers started choosing us, not because we were cheaper or flashier, but because we cared more, because we were building relationships, not just selling software, because our team believed in what we were doing. Slowly, growth picked back up. Customer retention improved, and when we went out for Series B funding, investors responded not to our numbers, but to our culture. To the fact that we'd faced competition without panicking, that we'd stuck to our values under pressure. Marcus led the round, $20 million. "Nathan, do you know why I'm investing this much? Not because you have the best technology, your competitors is comparable, but because you have something they don't. You have a team that trusts their leader, a leader who doesn't make decisions out of fear, a culture built on courage instead of control. That's what wins long term." That night, holding Emma while Sarah made dinner, I reflected on how far I'd come. 2 years ago, I'd been a man controlled by fear. Now I was leading a company through crisis without letting fear drive decisions, teaching a group how to surrender anxiety, raising a daughter with love instead of criticism. But God wasn't done teaching me about surrender. It was a Sunday morning when Pastor Mike approached me after the service. "Nathan, I have something to ask you. It's big, and I want you to pray about it seriously before answering." "Okay. We're starting a new campus, a satellite church in Bellevue. We need a lay leader to help launch it, someone who can share their story, disciple others, help build the culture. Nathan, I believe you're that person." My immediate internal response was panic. A church campus, that was ministry, real ministry. I wasn't qualified for that. I was just a businessman who'd learned to surrender fear. What if I said yes and failed? What if I wasn't good enough? What if I let people down? But even as those fears rose up, I recognized them. The same old patterns, the same lies I'd been believing for 35 years. "Pastor Mike, I'm terrified. I don't feel qualified. I've only been following Jesus seriously for 2 years. What if I'm not ready?" Nathan, you're never going to feel ready. That's the point. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. You've been practicing surrender for 2 years. You've learned what it means to trust God despite fear. That's exactly what people need to see. Not perfection, but honest faith. Can I talk to Sarah and pray about it? Of course, take 2 weeks. But Nathan, I'm not asking you to do this alone. I'm asking you to keep doing what you're already doing. Sharing your story, showing people what surrender looks like, pointing them to Jesus, just in a more intentional context. That night, Sarah and I had the longest conversation we'd had since deciding to start the company. This is different, I said. This is ministry. This is representing God to people. What if I mess up? What if I fail? Nathan, you've been in ministry for the past year. Leading that Tuesday night group, that's ministry. Sharing your story with people struggling with fear, that's ministry. This is just a bigger platform for what you're already doing. But what about the company? I can't do both well. Why not? Other people lead companies and serve in ministry, and you have a team you trust. You've been practicing delegation for 2 years. Maybe this is the next level, trusting your team even more so you can follow what God's calling you to. Over the next 2 weeks, I prayed more intensely than I'd prayed about anything except proposing to Sarah. God, is this you? Are you calling me to help launch this church campus? Because it feels too big, too important, too scary. But if it's you, I'll do it. I'll trust that you've gone before me even into this. The confirmation came from an unexpected source. My father called me one night. We talked regularly now. Our relationship transformed over the past 2 years. I told him about the opportunity. Dad, I'm afraid I'm not qualified, that I'll fail, that I'm not ready. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Son, do you remember what you told me in the hospital? When you forgave me? You said that none of us deserve forgiveness, but God gives it anyway, and you were just trying to do the same. That's what changed my life. Not theology, not perfect words, just honesty about God's grace. That's what people need. They don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be honest about how God meets us in our fear and teaches us courage. You're ready because you've been living it. Those words settled something in my spirit. I called Pastor Mike the next day. I'll do it. I'll help launch the campus. Not because I feel qualified, but because I trust God to work through my willingness even when I'm afraid. The next 6 months were the busiest of my life. Running a company that was now at 75 employees, raising Emma, who was learning to walk and getting into everything, leading the Tuesday night fear and anxiety group, and now planning the launch of a church campus. But I'd learned something crucial over the past 2 years. Busyness driven by purpose is different than busyness driven by fear. I wasn't working obsessively to prove I was enough. I was serving because God had called me to, trusting Him with the outcomes. The Bellevue campus launched on a Sunday morning in September, 2 years and 2 months after that first sermon that changed my life. 300 people showed up. I shared my story, the whole journey from fear to faith, and I ended with the words that had become my life message. 2 years ago, I was a man completely controlled by fear. Afraid to take risks, afraid to commit, afraid to become who God created me to be. But God spoke to me through a sermon. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And over the past 2 years, I've been learning what that means. It doesn't mean the fear goes away. It means God goes before us into the scary things. It means courage is choosing trust despite terror. It means surrender is the path to freedom. Whatever you're afraid of today, whatever's controlling you, paralyzing you, keeping you from the life God wants for you, you can give it to Him. You can trust that He's gone before you, that He'll be with you, that His love is stronger than your fear. I know because I've lived it. And if God can transform a man like me, a man who was drowning in fear, He can transform anyone. The question is, are you willing to surrender? Are you willing to trust? Are you willing to choose courage over comfort? After the service, dozens of people came up to me, sharing their fears, asking how to surrender, hungry for the freedom I'd found. And I realized This was why God had taken me through everything He'd taken me through, not just for my transformation, but so I could help others find theirs. Every fear I'd surrendered had equipped me to help someone else surrender theirs. That night, Sarah and I sat on our couch, Emma asleep in my arms. "You did it," she said. "You faced another fear. You stepped into something that terrified you. And God was faithful again. He's always faithful. That's what I'm learning. The circumstances change. The fears evolve. But God's faithfulness, that's constant. He really does go before us." 2 years. From a man controlled by fear to a man learning courage. From someone who played it safe to someone who took risks for the kingdom. From isolation to community, from employee to founder to ministry leader, from running from God to running toward Him. The transformation was profound, but the journey wasn't over. There were still fears to surrender. Still new territories God was calling me into. Still daily choices between fear and faith. But I'd learned the truth that changed everything. God goes before me into every scary thing. I never face anything alone. And that truth, that simple, profound, transformative truth made all the difference. 2.5 years after that first sermon, my life had become something I never could have imagined. The Bellevue campus was thriving, growing from 300 to nearly 800 people in 6 months. The company had successfully raised Series B and was scaling faster than ever. Emma was 18 months old, walking and talking and filling our home with joy. And the Tuesday night fear and anxiety group had grown so large we'd had to split into 3 separate groups. But I was learning that growth, whether in ministry, business or family, always brings new challenges. New fears to surrender, new opportunities to trust. It started with a phone call from Marcus on a Tuesday afternoon. "Nathan, we need to talk. Can you come to my office?" The old fear immediately tried to grab hold. Something was wrong. The company was failing. I'd made a mistake, but I recognized that voice now and refused to let it control me. In Marcus's office, he got straight to the point. "Nathan, we've been approached by a much larger company. They want to acquire you, full acquisition. The offer is substantial, enough that you'd never have to work again. Your team would be taken care of. Your customers would be served by a company with far more resources. It's a good deal." My heart started racing. Acquisition, selling the company, the dream I'd built, the team I'd assembled, the mission I believed in. "How much?" I asked. $80 million. The number was staggering. More money than I'd ever imagined. Financial security for life. The ability to focus full-time on ministry if I wanted. No more juggling a company and church leadership. "What do you think I should do?" "That's not my call to make. But Nathan, I will say this. You built this company because you believed in the mission, not because you wanted to get rich. So the question isn't, is this enough money? The question is this what God's calling you to do?" That night, I told Sarah about the offer. She was quiet for a long time. $80 million, she finally said. That's life-changing money." "I know. What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Part of me is excited. We could be completely financially secure. I could do ministry full-time. We could give generously. We'd never have to worry about money again. But another part of me is afraid that if I sell, I'm giving up something God gave me to steward, that I'm choosing comfort over calling." "Nathan, listen to yourself. You're afraid either way. Afraid of making the wrong choice. This is the same fear you've been surrendering for years. Fear of not being enough. Fear of making a mistake. The question is, which decision requires more trust? Which one requires more courage?" Over the next 2 weeks, I prayed more intensely than I'd prayed about anything. "God, I don't know what to do. $80 million is security and opportunity and freedom from financial stress. But the company is my baby, my dream. The thing you gave me courage to start. Do you want me to sell it or keep building it? I need you to show me." I talked to James. "What would you do?" "I can't answer that for you. But I can tell you this. Every time God has asked you to surrender something, it's been scary but right. Surrendering your fear of the project at work led to promotion. Surrendering your fear of commitment led to marriage. Surrendering your fear of starting the company led to this opportunity. Maybe the question isn't, should I sell, but what am I being called to surrender now? I talked to Pastor Mike. I'm terrified of making the wrong choice. Nathan, you're facing a decision that has no clear right answer. Both options have merit. Both could honor God. But here's what I've learned. God cares less about which option you choose and more about whether you're trusting Him through the decision. Whether you sell or keep building, do it in faith, not fear. I talked to my father. His perspective surprised me. Son, I spent my whole life chasing financial security. I made good money as an attorney, saved aggressively, built wealth. And you know what? It didn't make me happy. It didn't fix my fear or my wounds or my broken relationships. Money is a tool, not a solution. So don't make this decision based on financial security. Make it based on calling. What is God calling you to do? That's the only question that matters. 3 weeks after the offer came in, I was at the office late one night. Everyone else had gone home. I sat in the conference room where we'd had our first team meeting, where we'd celebrated our first customer, where we'd navigated the crisis with our competitor, and I prayed, God, I need clarity. I need to know what you want, because I can see arguments for both sides. Selling means security and full-time ministry and generous giving. Keeping the company means continuing the mission, stewarding what you gave me, growing something that helps people. I don't know which one honors you more. Show me, please. In the silence that followed, I felt God speak to my heart, not audibly, but clearly. What are you afraid of? The question stopped me. What was I afraid of? If I kept the company, I was afraid of missing out on financial security, afraid of making the wrong strategic decisions. Afraid of the company failing and proving I should have sold when I had the chance. If I sold the company, I was afraid of giving up my calling, afraid of choosing comfort over courage, afraid that in 5 years I'd regret not continuing to build what God had started. Either way, fear was trying to drive the decision, and then I heard it again, the truth I'd been learning for 2.5 years. Give me what scares you. I have already gone before you. And I realized God wasn't asking me to choose the safe option. He was asking me to choose the option that required the most trust, the option that meant surrendering the deepest fear. And for me, that meant keeping the company, because selling felt safe. It felt like securing my future, eliminating risk, choosing comfort, but keeping the company. That meant continuing to trust God with outcomes I couldn't control, continuing to lead in uncertainty, continuing to risk instead of retreat. The next morning, I called Marcus. I'm not selling. Are you sure? This is a lot of money to walk away from. I'm sure. Not because selling is wrong, it's a great offer, but because I don't think God's done with what He started here. I think there's more to build, more people to serve, more mission to fulfill, and I'd rather trust God with an uncertain future than choose financial security and wonder if I gave up too soon. I respect that. It takes courage to walk away from $80 million. It's not about the money, it's about the calling, and I believe God's calling me to keep building. When I told Sarah, she hugged me tight. I'm proud of you. You didn't let fear make this decision. Either fear of risk or fear of missing out. You chose what you believe God's calling you to, regardless of which option felt safer. That Sunday, I shared the decision with the Bellevue campus. Not to brag, but because people were watching my journey and learning from it. I had to make a huge decision this month, I told the congregation. An opportunity to sell my company for more money than I'd ever imagined. And I was terrified of making the wrong choice. Terrified of walking away from security, terrified of keeping something I should have sold, fear on both sides. But God reminded me of something I've been learning for 2.5 years. He doesn't call us to make the safe choice. He calls us to make the faithful choice, to trust Him with outcomes we can't control, to surrender our fear and walk in courage. I'm not saying everyone in this situation should make the same decision I made, but I am saying this: whatever decision you're facing, don't let fear drive it. Don't choose safety over calling. Don't choose comfort over courage. Trust that God has gone before you, that He'll be with you, that His plan is better than your security. After the service, a man in his 40s came up to me. I needed to hear that. I've been offered a promotion that would require moving across the country. More money, more prestige, but it would mean leaving our church community, pulling my kids from their schools, starting over. I've been paralyzed by fear of making the wrong choice. But you helped me see I need to stop asking which choice is safer and start asking which choice requires more trust in God. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. Not my own transformation, but how my journey helped others trust God with theirs. But the biggest test of surrender was still ahead. It was a Thursday evening when my phone rang. My mother. Her voice was shaking. "Nathan, it's your father. He had another heart attack. A massive one this time. You need to come. Now." I was on a plane to Portland within 3 hours. Sarah stayed with Emma but promised to follow if needed. And the whole flight, I wrestled with fear. Not fear that he'd die, though that was there, but fear of what his death would mean. We'd reconciled. We'd rebuilt our relationship. He'd transformed from the critical father who'd created so much of my fear to a grace-filled man who encouraged me. I wasn't ready to lose him. Not now. Not when we'd only had 2.5 good years together. At the hospital, my mother met me in the waiting room. "He's stable for now. But Nathan, it's bad. The doctors say we should prepare." I went into his room. He looked so small in the hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped and breathed for him. His eyes opened when I sat down. "Nathan, you came." "Of course I came, Dad. I don't have much time. Need to tell you something." "Dad, save your strength." "No. Listen. These past 2 years, watching you change, watching you become the man I couldn't be, it's been the greatest gift of my life. You broke the cycle. You chose courage over fear. You're raising Emma differently than I raised you, and that's redemption." Tears were streaming down my face. "Dad, you changed too. You apologized. You encouraged me. You supported me. That took courage. Only because you showed me it was possible. Nathan, I'm not afraid to die, because I know where I'm going. And I know that you're going to be okay, more than okay. You're going to keep surrendering fear, keep trusting God, keep helping others do the same. That's your calling. Don't let anything, not even my death, make you afraid again." We talked for hours. About his faith journey, about his regrets and his gratitude, about how proud he was of the man I'd become, about how he'd been praying for me every day since his first heart attack. "I've been asking God to use you," he said, "to take everything He taught you about surrender and use it to help as many people as possible. Don't play it safe, son. Don't let fear steal your impact. Keep being brave." He fell asleep around midnight. I sat with him, holding his hand, praying. "God, I'm not ready to lose him. We just got him back. We just started having a real relationship. It's not fair. It's not enough time." But even as I prayed those words, I knew what God was asking me to surrender. Not just my fear of losing my father, but my belief that I deserved more time. My demand that God give me what felt fair instead of trusting His plan. "God, I give this to you. My father's life, his death, the timing that feels too soon, my fear of losing him, my grief, all of it. I trust that you've gone before me even into this, that you'll be with me through it, that your plan is good even when it hurts." My father died 3 days later, peacefully surrounded by family, ready to meet Jesus. The funeral was small but meaningful. I gave the eulogy, sharing not just who he'd been, but who he'd become. How God had transformed a critical, fear-driven man into a grace-filled encourager. How his apology had freed me to forgive. How his change had shown me that transformation is always possible. "My father spent most of his life controlled by fear," I said. "Fear of not being enough. Fear of his children failing. Fear of losing control. And that fear created wounds in all of us. But in his final years, he learned what I've been learning, that God's love casts out fear, that surrender is the path to freedom, that it's never too late to change. And his legacy isn't the years of criticism. It's the courage he showed to apologize, the transformation he allowed God to work in him, the encouragement he gave me in my own journey. That's what I'll remember. That's what I'll honor. That's what I'll try to live out. The truth that we don't have to stay stuck in our fear, that God can transform anyone willing to surrender. After the funeral, dozens of people came up to me, people my father had worked with, friends from his church, family members, and many of them said the same thing. Your father talked about you all the time, about how proud he was, about how you taught him what courage looks like, his transformation in his final years. So much of it came from watching yours. I hadn't realized my journey had impacted him as much as his apology had impacted me. But that's how God works. Transformation ripples outward in ways we can't predict or control. Flying back to Seattle, I felt grief, but also peace. Peace that my father had died reconciled with God and with his family. Peace that we'd had 2.5 years of real relationship. Peace that his final years had been marked by grace instead of fear. And I felt something else. Renewed commitment to the calling God had given me. My father's final words echoed in my mind. Don't let anything, not even my death, make you afraid again. Keep being brave. That next Sunday I returned to the Bellevue campus. Pastor Mike had offered to let me take time off, but I knew I needed to be there, needed to share what I'd learned. I buried my father this week, I told the congregation, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it was also a profound reminder of something I've been learning for 2.5 years, that surrender isn't just about the good things, it's about the hard things too, the losses, the grief, the things that don't make sense. I had to surrender my father's life to God, had to trust that God's timing was right even when it felt too soon, had to believe that God's plan was good even though it hurt. And here's what I learned. God doesn't ask us to surrender because he wants to take things from us. He asks us to surrender because he wants to carry what we can't carry ourselves. My father's death hurts, but I'm not carrying that grief alone. God's carrying it with me, and that makes all the difference. After the service, a woman approached me, tears streaming down her face. I lost my husband 6 months ago, and I've been so angry at God, angry that he took him too soon, angry that it wasn't fair. But what you said about surrendering even the hard things, it's the first time I've felt like maybe I can do that. Maybe I can trust God even with this grief. That conversation reminded me why God had walked me through everything he'd walked me through, not just for my transformation, but so I could help others through theirs. That night, holding Emma while Sarah made dinner, I reflected on the past 2.5 years. From a man controlled by fear to someone learning courage, from avoiding risk to starting a company, from running from commitment to marriage and fatherhood, from hiding faith to leading a church campus, from a broken relationship with my father to reconciliation and redemption, and now from fearing loss to surrendering grief. Each step had required surrender. Each one had taught me that God really does go before us into every scary thing. Sarah looked at me across the kitchen. How are you doing, really? I'm sad. I miss him. I wish we'd had more time. But I'm also grateful. Grateful for the reconciliation we had. Grateful for how he changed. Grateful that his final years were marked by grace. And I'm at peace because I surrendered him to God. And God's been faithful just like he always is. Your father would be proud of you, of how you're handling this, of how you're continuing to choose courage even through grief. That night I prayed with deeper gratitude than I'd felt in months. God, this year has tested me in ways I didn't expect. The acquisition offer that required me to choose calling over comfort. My father's death that required me to surrender even my grief. But through it all, you've been faithful. You've gone before me. You've been with me. You've carried what I couldn't carry. Thank you for these 2.5 years, for teaching me that fear doesn't have to win, that courage is possible, that surrender is the path to freedom, for using my story to help others, for the company, the ministry, the marriage, the daughter, for my father's transformation and the reconciliation we had. Keep teaching me. Keep leading me. Keep showing me what it means to trust you with everything, the good and the hard, the joys and the losses, the dreams and the grief, because I'm learning. You really do go before me, into every scary thing, and that truth changes everything. 2.5 years. And the journey continued. More fears to surrender, more courage to choose, more opportunities to trust that God had gone before me. But I was ready, because I'd learned the truth that changed my life. God goes before me, into every scary thing. I never face anything alone, and that truth, that simple, profound, transformative truth, would carry me through whatever came next. 3 years after that first sermon, I found myself standing in front of 2,000 people at a conference center in Portland. It was the largest crowd I'd ever spoken to, a regional conference on mental health and faith, and I'd been invited to share my story about overcoming fear and anxiety. As I looked out at the sea of faces, I felt the familiar flutter of nerves. Not the paralyzing fear that used to control me, but healthy nervousness that meant what I was doing mattered. And underneath that nervousness, peace. The deep peace that comes from knowing God had gone before me even into this moment. I told my story, the whole journey, from the man controlled by fear to someone learning courage, from losing Sarah because I was too afraid to commit to proposing despite terror, from avoiding my father to reconciling before his death. From playing it safe professionally to starting a company and turning down an $80 million acquisition because I believed God had more for me to build. But I didn't just tell my story. I taught what I'd learned. Here's what 3 years of surrendering fear has taught me, I said. First, fear doesn't go away. You just get better at recognizing it and choosing courage despite it. Second, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's trusting God more than you fear the outcome. Third, surrender is a practice, not a one-time event. You practice it daily, sometimes hourly, until choosing courage becomes more natural than choosing fear. And fourth, this is the most important one, God really does go before you, into every scary thing. You never face anything alone. I taught them the practice that had changed my life. When fear rises up, recognize it, name it, then give it to God, out loud if you can. God, I'm afraid of this. I give it to you. I trust you've gone before me. Do that again and again, 10 times a day if you need to, 100 times. Eventually, surrender becomes your default instead of fear. After my talk, the conference organizers had set up a time for questions and prayer. They'd expected maybe 50 people to stay. Over 300 lined up. One by one, people shared their fears. A woman afraid her adult children were making destructive choices. A man terrified of losing his job. A college student paralyzed by fear of the future. A mother carrying guilt and fear after her daughter's suicide attempt. A pastor burned out and afraid to admit he was struggling. For 2 hours, I listened to their fears and prayed with them, not offering easy answers or quick fixes, but pointing them to the truth I'd learned. God goes before us. We can surrender what scares us. Courage is possible. The mother whose daughter had attempted suicide grabbed my hands, tears streaming. I've been so afraid. Afraid she'll try again, afraid I'll lose her, afraid it's my fault. The fear has been crushing me. But what you said about God going before me even into this, I needed to hear that. I needed permission to give this fear to Him instead of carrying it alone. God can carry what you can't, I told her. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Surrender it to Him every day, every hour if you need to, and trust that He's with you and your daughter through this. But the pastor who'd admitted burnout said, I've been afraid to be honest about struggling because I'm supposed to be the one who has it together. I'm supposed to be strong for everyone else, but I'm drowning, and I've been too afraid to ask for help. Strength isn't having it all together, I said. Strength is being honest about when you're struggling and trusting God to meet you there. Your vulnerability won't weaken your ministry. It'll deepen it. because people don't need perfect pastors. They need honest ones who show them what it looks like to trust God through the hard things. By the time the last person left, I was exhausted but filled with purpose. This was why God had walked me through everything He'd walked me through, so I could help others walk through theirs. Flying back to Seattle, I reflected on how much had changed in 3 years. The company now had over 100 employees and was profitable, something only 10% of startups achieve. The Bellevue campus had grown to over 1,000 people attending weekly. The Tuesday night groups had multiplied into a network of support groups across the region. But more than external growth, I'd changed internally. Fear no longer controlled my decisions. It still showed up. I wasn't immune to it, but I'd learned to recognize it, surrender it, and choose courage despite it. Sarah picked me up from the airport with Emma, who was now 2.5 and full of personality. "Daddy!" She ran to me and I scooped her up. "How was the conference?" Sarah asked as we drove home. "Powerful. Over 300 people stayed for prayer, so many carrying fears they've never named or surrendered. It reminded me of who I was 3 years ago. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, using your story to help others find freedom. I'm proud of you." That week brought unexpected news. The acquiring company that had offered $80 million a year ago came back with a new offer. This time, it wasn't about buying the company, it was about partnership. They wanted to integrate our platform with theirs, reaching 10 times as many customers, while letting us maintain our independence and mission. "It's the best of both worlds," Marcus explained. "You get to keep building what you started, but you get their distribution, their resources, their customer base. Nathan, this could take you from helping thousands of businesses to helping hundreds of thousands." The scale was exciting, but it also triggered fear. Fear of growing too fast, fear of losing what made us special, fear of the complexity that comes with partnership. I recognized that voice immediately, the same fear that had tried to stop me from starting the company, from taking on the original project at work, from proposing to Sarah. Fear disguised as caution. "Give me a week to pray about it," I told Marcus. That Sunday, Pastor Mike preached on the parable of the talents again, the same passage that had convicted me 3 years ago about not burying what God had given me. "The servant who buried his talent didn't lose it," Pastor Mike said. "He kept it safe, but safe isn't the goal. Faithful stewardship is the goal. Using what God gives you to multiply impact, taking risks for the kingdom, trusting God with outcomes you can't control." The message landed exactly where I needed it. God wasn't calling me to play it safe with the company. He was calling me to steward it faithfully, which meant accepting opportunities to multiply impact even when they felt scary. I called Marcus the next day. "Let's do the partnership. Let's help as many businesses as we can." The partnership launched 3 months later, and just as Marcus had predicted, it multiplied everything. Our customer base grew from 500 to over 5,000 in 6 months. The impact of our platform, helping small businesses operate more efficiently, expanded exponentially. But the growth also brought challenges: bigger team, more complexity, higher stakes, and more opportunities for fear to creep in. One particular challenge tested everything I'd learned. 6 months into the partnership, our partner company's CEO wanted to change our pricing model in a way that would maximize revenue but hurt some of our smallest customers, the ones who needed us most. "It's just business," their CEO said in a meeting. "The small customers aren't as profitable. We need to optimize for revenue." Everything in me resisted. We'd started this company to help businesses, not to maximize profit at their expense. But saying no to a company 10 times our size, that was terrifying. What if they ended the partnership? What if we lost everything we'd gained? I could feel the fear trying to control my decision. Fear of losing the partnership. Fear of missing this opportunity. Fear of not being able to compete without them. But I'd learned something over 3 years. Integrity matters more than opportunity. Calling matters more than success. Faithfulness matters more than growth. In the next meeting, I said clearly, I appreciate the business logic, but we can't make that change. We started this company to help small businesses. If we price them out now, we're abandoning our mission. I'd rather grow slower and stay true to our values than optimize revenue at the expense of the people we exist to serve. Their CEO looked surprised. You're willing to lose this partnership over pricing? I hope it doesn't come to that, but yes, if necessary. Because some things matter more than growth. Integrity is one of them. There was a long silence. Then their CEO smiled. You know what? I respect that. Most founders would cave under pressure, but you're sticking to your values. That's rare. We'll find a different pricing model, one that works for everyone. Walking out of that meeting, I felt the familiar sensation of having chosen courage over fear. It never got old. That feeling of trusting God with outcomes instead of controlling through compromise. That night, I shared the story with the Tuesday night group. I was terrified, I admitted. Terrified of losing the partnership. Terrified of missing the opportunity. But I've learned something. Fear often tells us to compromise our values for security. And every time we choose values over security, we discover that God provides in ways we didn't expect. A man in the group named Stephen raised his hand. I'm facing the exact same thing at my job. My boss is asking me to do something that feels unethical, and I'm terrified of saying no because I need this job. But hearing your story, it gives me courage to stick to my values. 2 weeks later, Stephen came back to the group with an update. I said no to my boss, told him I couldn't do what he was asking, and I was sure I'd get fired. But instead, he respected it. Said he'd been testing me to see if I had integrity. I got a promotion instead of getting fired. God really did go before me. These stories, seeing others find courage through the lessons I'd learned, they were the greatest gift of this journey. But the most significant moment came from an unexpected source. Emma, at 2.5, was already showing signs of anxiety. She was afraid of the dark. Afraid of loud noises, afraid of being separated from Sarah or me. One night, she was crying in her room, afraid of shadows on the wall. Sarah and I went in together and I sat on her bed. Emma, what are you afraid of? The shadows. They're scary. I understand. Sometimes things feel scary even when they're not dangerous. But can I teach you something I learned? Something that helps when I'm afraid? What? We can give our fears to God. We can tell him we're scared and ask him to help us be brave. Want to try it? She nodded, her little face so earnest. Okay, let's pray together. God, I'm afraid of the shadows. I give my fear to you. Help me be brave. Can you say that with me? Emma repeated the words, her voice small but clear, and then something beautiful happened. She took a deep breath and said, I feel better now. Sarah looked at me with tears in her eyes. You're teaching her what your father never taught you. You're breaking the cycle. That moment, praying with my daughter, teaching her to surrender fear instead of being controlled by it, felt like the culmination of everything I'd been learning. The generational pattern was broken. Emma wouldn't grow up paralyzed by fear like I had. She was learning courage at 2.5, not 34. 3 years and 3 months after that first sermon, I received an invitation that felt like the biggest honor of my journey. A major Christian conference wanted me to be a keynote speaker. 20,000 people, streamed online to hundreds of thousands more. The topic, From Fear to Faith, Learning to Surrender What Scares You. My immediate response was terror. 20,000 people. What if I wasn't good enough? What if I failed? What if I let people down? But I recognized that voice instantly, the same voice that had tried to stop me from everything God had called me to, and I knew what I needed to do. God, I'm afraid. This is huge. This is way beyond what I think I'm capable of, but I'm giving it to you. I trust you've gone before me even into this. If you want me to do it, I'll do it. I'll trust you with the outcome. I accepted the invitation. Over the next 3 months, I prepared more than I'd prepared for anything. Not just my talk, but my heart. Because I knew 20,000 people would be watching, not just to hear my words, but to see if I really believed what I was teaching. Sarah helped me practice, James gave me feedback, Pastor Mike prayed with me, and my team at the company supported me, taking on extra work so I could focus on preparation. The night before the conference, I couldn't sleep, not from anxiety, though there was some of that, but from overwhelming gratitude. 3 years ago, I'd been a man controlled by fear. Now I was about to stand in front of 20,000 people and teach them what God had taught me about courage. I got out of bed and prayed, God, I can't believe this is my life. I can't believe you took a fearful, anxious, controlling man and transformed him into someone who helps others find courage. I can't believe you're using my story on this scale. Tomorrow, 20,000 people will be listening, and I want them to hear not just my story, but yours. I want them to know that you meet people in their fear, that you teach them courage, that you go before them into every scary thing. Use me tomorrow. Use my story. Use every fear I've surrendered and every lesson I've learned. Just let people encounter you. The next morning, standing backstage before going on, I felt the fear trying to grab hold. What if I stumbled over my words? What if people didn't respond? What if this was all a mistake? And then I heard it, the truth that had become my anchor. I have already gone before you. You don't do this alone. I walked on stage. 20,000 people, lights blinding, my heart racing, but underneath the nervousness, peace, the deep, unshakable peace that comes from trusting God with outcomes. I told my story, the whole journey, and I ended with the words that had become my life message. 3 years ago, God spoke to me through a sermon, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." And those words started a journey that changed everything, a journey from fear to faith, from control to surrender, from playing it safe to choosing courage. And here's what I want you to know. Whatever you're afraid of, whatever's controlling you, paralyzing you, keeping you from the life God wants for you, you can surrender it. You can trust that God has gone before you, that He'll be with you, that His love is stronger than your fear. The transformation won't happen overnight. It's a practice, a daily choice, sometimes an hourly choice. But over time, as you keep surrendering fear and choosing courage, you'll discover something profound. God really does go before you, into every scary thing. And that truth, that simple, powerful, transformative truth, changes everything. Give God what scares you. Trust that He's already gone before you, and watch Him transform your fear into faith, your anxiety into courage, your control into surrender, because that's what He does. That's who He is, and He wants to do it for you. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people came forward for prayer, hundreds committed to starting the practice of daily surrender, and in the weeks that followed, I received thousands of emails and messages from people sharing their stories of choosing courage over fear. But the message that impacted me most came from an unexpected source. My mother sent me a video she'd recorded. "Nathan, I watched your talk at the conference, and I want you to know your father would be so proud, not just of your success, but of who you've become. A man who faces his fears, a man who helps others do the same, a man who's breaking generational patterns and teaching his daughter courage instead of control. That's the greatest legacy any parent could hope for. I'm proud of you, son, so proud." I watched that video 3 times, crying each time, because it represented something profound, full circle. From a son shaped by a father's fear-driven criticism to a father teaching his daughter courage, from breaking under the weight of impossible standards to breaking generational cycles, from being paralyzed by fear to helping thousands find freedom. 3 years. 3 years of learning to surrender what scared me. 3 years of trusting that God had gone before me. 3 years of choosing courage over comfort, faith over fear, surrender over control. And the journey was still continuing. More fears to surrender, more courage to choose, more opportunities to trust. But I was ready, because I'd learned the truth that changed everything. God goes before me, into every scary thing. I never face anything alone. And that truth, that simple, profound, life-altering truth, made all the difference. 5 years after that first sermon, I stood in the same place where everything had begun, Grace Community Church. But this time, I wasn't sitting in the back row, afraid and alone. I was standing at the front, about to share my testimony on the anniversary of the sermon that had changed my life. Pastor Mike had invited me to speak on the exact same Sunday, 5 years to the day since he'd preached about Joshua and courage. 5 years since God had spoken words into my heart that I couldn't ignore. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. As I looked out at the congregation, I saw faces that represented my entire journey. James, who'd shown me what surrender looked like. Sarah, my wife of 4 years, holding our second daughter, 3-month-old Grace. Emma, now 4.5, sitting with my mother. Members of the Tuesday night groups that had multiplied across the region. Employees from my company, people from the Bellevue campus. And dozens of others whose lives had intersected with mine over these 5 transformative years. 5 years ago, I began. I walked into this church for the first time. I was 34 years old and I was drowning. Not in water, but in fear. Fear controlled every decision I made. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough, fear of taking risks, fear of commitment, fear of becoming like my father, fear of being exposed as inadequate. I'd built my entire life around avoiding those fears, playing it safe, staying small, protecting myself from vulnerability. And in the process, I'd lost the woman I loved, damaged my relationship with my family, and created a life that looked successful on the outside, but felt empty on the inside. That Sunday morning, I sat right there. I pointed to the back row, because even where I sat was controlled by fear. I needed an escape route, a way to leave unnoticed if things got uncomfortable. That's how I lived, always with an exit strategy, always protecting myself, always controlled by fear I didn't even realize was fear. I paused, letting the memory wash over me, and then Pastor Mike preached about Joshua, about God's command to be strong and courageous, about how courage isn't the absence of fear, it's trusting God despite the fear. And those words, they wrecked me, because I realized I'd been living the opposite. I'd been letting fear make every decision, and it was destroying me. I shared the whole journey, not the sanitized version, but the real one, the messy, difficult, beautiful process of learning to surrender fear, about meeting James and learning the practice of daily surrender, about taking on the project at work that terrified me, about the conversation with my father in the hospital and the forgiveness I'd had to extend, about proposing to Sarah despite being paralyzed by fear of failing as a husband, about starting the company when every logical part of me said it was too risky, about turning down the $80 million acquisition because I believed God had more for me to build, about my father's transformation in his final years and his death that taught me to surrender even grief, about becoming a father and teaching Emma to pray through her fears instead of being controlled by them, about leading the Tuesday night groups and watching hundreds of people learn to surrender their anxieties, about helping launch the Bellevue campus and speaking at conferences. But here's what I want you to understand, I said. The transformation wasn't about the external successes. Yes, the company grew. Yes, I got married and became a father. Yes, I got involved in ministry, but the real transformation was internal. It was learning that I didn't have to be controlled by fear, that courage was possible, that surrender wasn't weakness, it was wisdom, that God really does go before us into every scary thing. 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined this life, not because of the circumstances, though those are beyond what I could have planned, but because I couldn't imagine being free from fear. I thought fear was just who I was, that anxiety was my personality, that playing it safe was wisdom. But God showed me something different. He showed me that fear is a feeling, not a destiny, that I could feel afraid and choose courage anyway, that surrender wasn't giving up, it was giving God what I was never meant to carry alone. I looked directly at the congregation. Some of you are where I was 5 years ago, controlled by fears you might not even recognize as fear. Anxiety that feels normal because you've lived with it so long. Caution that's actually just self-protection. Playing it safe because you're terrified of taking risks. And I want to tell you, freedom is possible. Courage is learnable. Surrender is a practice you can develop. You don't have to live controlled by fear for the rest of your life. God can transform you just like He transformed me. I taught them the practice that had changed my life, the same practice I'd been teaching for 5 years. When fear rises up, and it will rise up, recognize it, name it. Don't let it disguise itself as wisdom or caution or prudence. Call it what it is, fear. Then give it to God, out loud if you can. God, I'm afraid of this. I give it to you. I trust you've gone before me. Do that every day, multiple times a day, 100 times a day if you need to. Don't wait until you feel ready. Don't wait until the fear is small enough to manage. Give it to God when it's overwhelming, when it's crushing you, when it feels too big to surrender. That's when surrender matters most. And over time, not overnight but over time, you'll discover something profound. The fear doesn't disappear, but its control over you weakens. Choosing courage becomes more natural. Trusting God becomes your default instead of trying to control everything. And you'll look back after months or years and realize you're different, fundamentally, undeniably different. After I finished, Pastor Mike invited anyone who wanted prayer to come forward. I expected maybe 50 people. Over 200 came. For the next 2 hours I prayed with people. Some I knew, many I didn't, each carrying fears that had controlled them, some for years, some for decades. And I got to share with each one the truth that had set me free. God goes before you. You can surrender what scares you. Courage is possible. A man in his 60s, tears streaming down his face, said, "I've been controlled by fear my whole life, 63 years. I thought it was too late to change. But hearing your story, if you can change at 34, maybe I can change at 63. It's never too late," I told him. My father changed in his 70s. God can transform anyone at any age. The question isn't, is it too late? The question is, are you willing to start? A young woman, probably early 20s, said, "I'm terrified of failing, of not being good enough, of disappointing people. It's paralyzing me. I can't make decisions because I'm so afraid of making the wrong one." "I know that fear intimately," I said. "I lived with it for 34 years. But here's what I learned. The fear of failure only has power if we let it control our choices. You're going to fail sometimes. Everyone does. But failure while trying is better than success at playing it safe. Start practicing surrender. Every time the fear rises up, give it to God. Trust that He's gone before you even into potential failure." A mother holding a baby said, "I'm terrified I'm going to damage my daughter the way my parents damaged me, that I'll pass on my anxiety and fear, that I'll repeat the patterns." "I felt the exact same way," I said. "But here's the beautiful truth. You get to break the cycle. You get to parent differently than you were parented. I'm teaching my daughters to surrender fear instead of being controlled by it. You can do the same. The fact that you're aware of the patterns and afraid of repeating them, that's actually a good sign. It means you'll be intentional about doing differently." Each conversation was sacred, each person a reminder of why God had walked me through everything He'd walked me through. Not just for my transformation, but so I could help others find theirs. When the last person left, I sat in the front pew, exhausted but full. Sarah came and sat beside me, baby Grace in her arms. "You did it," she said. "You came full circle. 5 years ago you sat in the back row, afraid and alone. Today you stood at the front and helped hundreds of people find courage. That's beautiful. I couldn't have done any of it without you. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. You pushed me to face my fears. You walked with me through every scary step. This transformation, it's ours, not just mine." Emma climbed into my lap. "Daddy, I liked your story. About how you were scared, but God helped you be brave. I hugged her tight. That's right, sweetie. We all get scared sometimes, but we don't have to let fear be the boss. We can give it to God and be brave anyway. Like when I was scared of the dark and we prayed. Exactly like that. You're already learning what took me 34 years to figure out. That afternoon, our family went to Puget Sound, the overlook where I'd proposed to Sarah, where I'd prayed about starting the company, where I'd wrestled with so many fears over the years. It had become a sacred place for me, a place of surrender and decision. We sat on a bench, watching boats on the water, Emma playing nearby, and I reflected on 5 years of transformation. The company had continued to grow beyond anything I'd imagined. We now had over 200 employees and served more than 20,000 businesses. The partnership had been successful beyond our projections. We'd been profitable for 3 years straight, and just last month we'd been approached about going public, an IPO that would value the company at over $500 million. $500 million, from a dream I'd been too afraid to pursue to a $500 million company. The number was almost incomprehensible. But more than the business success, I was proud of the culture we'd built, a culture where people felt safe to take risks, where failure was seen as learning, not shame, where trust mattered more than control, where we served our mission before maximizing profit. The Bellevue campus had grown to over 1,500 people. We'd planted 2 more campuses in the past year. And the network of fear and anxiety support groups had spread to over 40 churches across the region, helping thousands of people learn to surrender what scared them. I'd written a book about my journey, Give God What Scares You, that had sold over 100,000 copies and been translated into 15 languages. I received emails daily from people around the world sharing how the book had helped them find courage. But the thing I was most grateful for, more than business success, more than ministry impact, more than book sales, was my family. Sarah, my partner in everything. Emma, who was learning courage at 4 instead of 34. And Grace, who would grow up in a home where surrender was practiced, where fear didn't rule, where courage was modeled. The generational pattern was broken. The cycle was ended. My daughters would never know what it felt like to be crushed by impossible standards, or controlled by criticism, or paralyzed by fear of not being enough. They were learning trust instead of terror, courage instead of control, surrender instead of self-protection. That was the real victory. That was the transformation that mattered most. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked. "Everything, all of it. How far we've come, how much has changed. How God's been faithful through every step. Any regrets?" I thought about it carefully. Not regrets exactly, but I do wish I'd learned this earlier. I wish I'd found courage at 24 instead of 34. Think of the decade I could have lived differently. But would you have been ready at 24? Maybe you needed those years of struggling with fear to appreciate the freedom you found. Maybe the journey was exactly what it needed to be. She was right. The pain of those fear-filled years had made the joy of freedom that much sweeter. The struggle had given me empathy for others still struggling. The transformation was powerful precisely because I'd been so stuck before. As the sun started to set over Puget Sound, I prayed, not asking for anything, just offering gratitude. "God, 5 years ago, you spoke to me through a sermon. Words I couldn't ignore. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." And those words started a journey that changed everything. Thank you for every step of that journey, for the project at work that taught me to take risks, for James, who showed me what surrender looked like, for reconciliation with my father before he died, for Sarah, who believed in me when I was too afraid to believe in myself, for the courage to propose, for the dream of starting a company, for turning down the acquisition because you had more for me to build, for Emma and Grace, for ministry opportunities, for every person I've gotten to help find freedom from fear. Thank you for not leaving me where you found me, for transforming a man controlled by fear into someone learning courage, for teaching me that surrender isn't weakness, it's wisdom, for proving that you really do go before us into every scary thing. 5 years. 5 years of learning to give you what scares me. 5 years of trusting that you've already gone before me. 5 years of choosing courage over comfort, faith over fear, surrender over control. And the journey continues. There will be more fears to surrender, more courage to choose, more opportunities to trust. But I'm ready, because I've learned the truth that changes everything. You go before me, into every scary thing. I never face anything alone. Use me for whatever comes next. Use my story to help as many people as possible find the freedom I've found. Use the company, the ministry, the platform, the relationships, all of it for your purposes. Just keep teaching me, keep leading me, keep showing me what it means to surrender fear and walk in faith. Because this life, this free, courageous, surrendered life, it's better than anything I could have built through my own controlling, self-protecting fear. And I want to live it fully, for as long as you give me breath. Sarah put her hand on mine. Emma came running back, wanting to show us a shell she'd found. Grace started fussing, ready to eat. And life, beautiful, messy, ordinary life, continued. But I was living it differently now. Not controlled by fear, but guided by faith. Not protecting myself, but trusting God. Not playing it safe, but choosing courage. Not carrying what I was never meant to carry, but surrendering it to the one who could. 5 years. From a man drowning in fear to a man learning to swim in surrender. From someone who avoided risk to someone who embraced it. From playing it safe to chasing dreams. From isolation to community. From broken relationships to reconciliation. From employee to founder. From son to husband to father. From hiding faith to leading others into it. The transformation was complete, but also just beginning. Because surrender isn't a destination, it's a journey, a daily practice, a constant choice. And I would keep choosing it every day, every hour when needed, every moment that fear tried to grab control. Because I'd learned the truth that changed my life. God goes before me. He has already gone into every scary thing I'll ever face. I never walk alone. That truth, that simple, profound, life-altering truth, had set me free 5 years ago, and it would keep me free for the rest of my life. Give me what scares you, God had said. I have already gone before you. 5 years of giving him what scared me. 5 years of trusting he'd gone before me. 5 years of discovering that his way was better than my fear-driven control. And a lifetime ahead of continuing to learn that lesson. Continuing to practice that surrender. Continuing to choose courage over comfort. One day at a time. One fear at a time. One surrender at a time. Trusting that God really does go before us. Into every scary thing. Always, the journey from fear to faith was complete, but the life of surrendered courage, that was just beginning, and I was ready, because God had gone before me, and he always would.